Chapter 5:17. Xiaoqing's luck finally turned for the better. Although they encountered a storm, they were lucky that their boat was safe after it was over. It was a blessing in disguise. Even Qin Zishi teased Xiaoqing. Although she was a jinx, she was a good person. At least they were safe for now. After the last storm, they had not encountered a second natural or man-made disaster. But other than Qin Zishi and the others, everyone wanted to kill Xiaoqing. Life on the sea was like this. They had no choice but to eat dry food every day. In order to prevent scurvy, they ate the fruits they brought with them. They only dared to eat a little each time because there wasn't much of it. As for Xiaoqing and the others, their lives were like this. Every day, they would discuss what to eat today. Every day, they would try new dishes. While they were pitifully gnawing on dry food, the others were eating seafood, barbecued meat, 3 meat dishes, 1 vegetable dish, and even soup. Other than being infuriated, what else could they say? They couldn't beat Dai in a fight, nor did they dare to scold him. Some shameless people even tried to eat some food, but when they got close, they saw Dai grinning at them. His teeth and expression couldn't be described by the word fierce. Therefore, they gave up obediently. Some smart people wanted to buy some food from Xiaoqing, but after hearing the price, they gave up, because they really couldn't afford it. Some people secretly complained about Xiaoqing, but after thinking about it carefully, they felt that the price was actually quite reasonable. After all, fresh vegetables were very expensive on land, including meat and seafood. Although they were very common on the sea, what was more common on the sea were fierce beasts. Except for a master like Xiaoqing, there weren't many people who dared to go to the sea to look for food. Vegetables and meat were expensive on land, so they would definitely be more expensive on the sea. After all, the rarer something was, the more expensive it was. Besides, there were processing fees. Didn't people need money to cook? After thinking about it carefully, it was still very expensive. But what could they do? They couldn't force people to buy, sell, or rob. If they couldn't afford it, they could only watch. But the point was that Xiaoqing and the others were too much. Couldn't they hide their food and go back to their rooms? Don't let them see it. Even if she didn't want to eat in the room because it was too cramped, she could have eaten on the deck. Could she not seduce them? That aroma, that dish, some people deliberately praised it loudly, as if they were afraid that they didn't know how delicious the dish was. To hell with being shameless. Therefore, other than Xiaoqing's group, everyone else was living in an abyss of suffering, while Xiaoqing's group's life was like heaven. This kind of gap made people have the urge to kill people every minute and every second. Chapter 5:18. For example, Fenglan's base was built on the seaside. As for Country M, the first thing they wanted to do after they went ashore was to find a base and have a big meal to satisfy their stomachs, which had been tortured by Xiaoqing. However, after walking for a day, they slowly went deep into Country M, but they didn't see a single person except for some building debris, let alone a survivor base. It was so desolate that Xiaoqing felt like the whole Country M had fallen under the claws of zombies, which wasn't a good thing. It's getting dark. Let's set up camp here for the time being, Qin Zishi said after looking at the sky. The more they were in someone else's territory, the more vigilant they had to be. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know how they died. Not to mention them, even Xiaoqing didn't dare to run around at night in a strange foreign country, unless she wanted to die. Therefore, this group of poor people could only continue to accept Xiaoqing's mental abuse when they were full of hope. They rested for a night and continued to walk forward the next day. After walking for more than 2 days, they saw living people for the first time. The living people were a man and a woman, who were surrounded by zombies and looked to be in danger. Xiaoqing and the others happened to pass by and saw them. Originally, they didn't want to save them. After all, they didn't want to save 2 foreigners. It was Xiaoqing who suggested, "I think we should save them. There are so many zombies there, and they are 2 foreigners. Why should we save them? Are you the only one who is kind-hearted? Then you go and save them," one of the 2 civilian staff said stiffly. Xiaoqing ignored him and said faintly, "It's not a good idea for us to run around blindly like headless flies. If we save the 2 of them, they are our countrymen after all. They should know the situation of our country better than we do. They can lead the way for us. Everyone thought about it and agreed. They hadn't met anyone for 2 days. If they didn't save these 2 people, they might really run around like headless flies. They didn't know when they would find a survivor base. With 2 locals leading the way, it was naturally much more convenient. But some people were stubborn. In the time it takes to save him, we might have already found a survivor base. Then go look for it yourself, Xiao Qing said lazily. Then, she led Dai into the battle. As soon as she and Dai went over, Qin Lishi and Zhu Morchen followed behind. Then, Wu Jiaojiao joined the fray. Before Wu Jiaojiao joined the fray, she cast a sidelong glance at the civilian who spoke. I've never seen anyone who can talk more than a girl. The civilian staff member glared at him, looking like he wanted to curse but couldn't. When Xiao Qing descended from the sky with her Dai, she saw the man and woman shouting for help with a surprised expression. Before Xiao Qing landed, she stretched out her finger and countless vines rose from the ground. Those vines seemed to be alive, and they trapped the zombies tightly. The 2 foreigners weren't stupid. They quickly picked up their guns and started shooting. Because those zombies were trapped by the vines, they couldn't move at all, so they could shoot one zombie in the head with one shot. Occasionally, their hands would tremble a little, and they would miss their aim. At least 9 out of 10 bullets would hit the target. Dai's lethality was much higher than the 2 foreigners. Wherever it went, there would be a rain of blood. After Xiao Qing landed, she called out Da Hua. Da Hua rushed into the zombie crowd with its little brother, Xiao Hong. Whenever the zombies saw them, Xiao Hong would immediately stretch out its tentacles and wrap the zombies tightly, then throw them to Da Hua as a show of respect. Chapter 519. After all, it mainly sucked blood and energy. Zombies were trash to it. It would be better to use them to please its boss. Da Hua was very satisfied with Little Red's tactfulness. It didn't take in this little brother for nothing. The 2 flowers swept through the area quickly. After Da Hua leveled up, it ate more and more things. It only ate, but it didn't grow. It didn't even know whose stomach it ate. By the time Qin Zishi and the others arrived, Da Hua had already started cleaning up the area. It didn't let go of the broken limbs on the ground. It only cared about stuffing them into its stomach. It looked very ferocious. Xiao Qing also knew a little bird language. She went forward to communicate with the 2 foreigners. The 2 foreigners took the lead and held Xiao Qing's hand. Oh God, we must have met an angel. An angel from the east. Thank you for saving us. Otherwise, we would have become the feces in the zombies' stomachs. Xiao Qing was stunned. Then, she said, "You're welcome." Before she could ask anything, the hospitable and grateful foreigners had already insisted on inviting Xiao Qing to their base as a guest. Since the goal had been achieved, the process didn't matter. Xiao Qing thought to herself expressionlessly. She waved her hand and brought her friends and a group of people who were dragging her down to follow the 2 foreigners. Among the 2 foreigners, the man was a chatterbox. He talked a lot along the way. Xiao Qing didn't need to ask for any information at all. He had already delivered himself to her door. First, Xiao Qing knew their names. However, because it was too complicated, she couldn't remember them. But that wasn't the key. She could call them Man A and Woman B for the time being. The situation in Country M was worse than they had imagined. 3 months ago, an expedition team found a giant hive in the forest that was similar to a beehive but much larger than a beehive. The nature of Country M's adventurous made them unable to resist the temptation to go in and explore. However, the truth was that they had provoked a demon. The outside of the hive looked very old. After entering, they immediately smelled a faint fishy and foul smell. The light became dimmer, and the stench became stronger. There were also cracking sounds under their feet. Someone turned on a flashlight and shone it on the ground. They found that the ground was filled with white bones. Some belonged to animals, and some belonged to humans. At this time, the few of them were already a little scared, but they still mustered up their courage to go deeper. The deeper they went, the stronger the stench became. Then, in the center of the nest, They found a huge pool that was so red that it was almost black, and in the middle of the pool was a large cocoon. They thought that they had discovered a treasure. As they cheered, they prepared to step forward and drag the cocoon back. But the moment they approached, the cocoon broke. Furry worm legs extended out of the cocoon. The last thing to crawl out was a huge queen bee. The three of them woke up from the shock, but it was too late to run. Two of them were quickly pierced through the waist by the sharp end of the queen bee's leg. One of them ran faster. He hurriedly looked back and found that the queen bee had already pierced the stinger into one of the people's bodies. The round eggs were constantly being discharged into the person's body. Not long after, young poisonous wasps came out from under the person's skin. His hair stood on end, and he quickened his pace to leave. After he left, he told the story to others, but very few people believed him. Who would have thought that this was just the beginning? Not long after, black beetles, poisonous bees that like to eat people, and marching ants crawled out of the forest. They were much more terrifying than zombies. Wherever they passed, not to mention survivors, not even plants survived. Scorched earth and wreckage. The country immediately organized people to resist. They found that the poisonous bees and marching ants were afraid of fire. This should be the nature of insects. But the black beetles were not afraid of anything. They could even devour abilities. Their shells were extremely hard. They could sneak into the city through the walls and eat people into empty shells or piles of bones. Moreover, the poisonous bees and marching ants were limited in their fear of fire. In the entire country, because of these three insects, the number of survivors sharply decreased in a short period of time. Especially in this season, it was the time for the poisonous bees to lay eggs. It was unknown how many people were parasitized. Their bodies were full of poisonous bee eggs, and finally, they were eaten by the little poisonous bees that broke out of their shells. The country's research institute also did research day and night, trying to find the weaknesses of these insects, their natural enemies, and invent something to deal with them. But the fact was that humans were losing ground. At least so far, that thing had not been invented. Chapter 520. The American people retreated and finally gave up the survivor bases on the edge. They all gathered in the center, where there were only 3 large bases left. Apart from these 3 survivor bases, there were very few other bases left. That was why they had not found a single survivor base after walking for so long. In addition to these 3 major survivor bases, there were many individual households in the American. They often lived in remote areas, with a family or 1 or 2 people living together. They were self-sufficient. It was not similar to the current situation in the Celestial Empire. Under the enthusiasm of the 2 foreigners, a group of people went together. The place they were now at was a little far from the nearest base. Xiaoqing asked them, "Do you know any bases with more people in China?" Man A immediately said, "Oh, of course I know. The original Chinatown survivor base was established after the Doomsday. It is very powerful. Even now, it is one of the only 3 survivor bases. Do you want to go there?" Xiaoqing nodded. It was said that these overseas Chinese had contacted the capital and wanted to return to China. They came here partly because of this. Man A hesitated for a while and said, "Well, I will take you there. I know people there. Now the Chinatown survivor base is under martial law. Ordinary people can't enter. Thank you." Xiaoqing thanked him seriously. Then they went in the direction of the Chinatown survivor base. One day was obviously not enough for them to walk to the Chinatown survivor base, so they had to camp at noon and night. Noon was short. Originally, it was enough to deal with it, but there was one who liked to take a nap. That was Dai. For some reason, Dai was very sleepy recently, and the amount of crystal nuclei he absorbed every day had greatly increased. Xiaoqing laughed at him, "You are eating more and more. If you continue like this, I won't be able to feed you sooner or later." She took out all the high-level crystal nuclei and gave them to Dai. In the past, Dai didn't sleep during the day or night. Now, he didn't sleep during the day. When he stopped, Xiaoqing would cook. When she finished, she would look back and see that he had already nodded and fallen asleep. Xiaoqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The only thing she could do was to drag everyone to take an afternoon nap. What? Unwilling to sleep? What? Do you think napping is a waste of time? What? Did he have to leave? Come, let's exchange some pointers. It just so happens that my hands have been itching recently. After the sparring session with Thornhead, no one else raised any objections. Xiaoqing felt that she was very democratic. Man A and woman B were new to the team. They didn't know how cruel Xiaoqing was. They were closer to their savior, Xiaoqing. When Xiaoqing was cooking at noon, they kindly provided some ingredients, which were from poisonous bees. Although these poisonous bees were good at killing people, they were even better at making honey. The queen bee needed a lot of energy to lay eggs. For the queen bee, the best thing was human flesh and blood, which could provide a lot of energy. The only thing that belonged to human flesh and blood was nectar. Those worker bees often accumulated a lot of nectar in the pool in the nest. The bloody pool that the explorers saw was actually the nectar that had been deposited for a long time. What the two foreigners provided was nectar. This nectar was obtained from the stomachs of poisonous bees. There was a small amount of it, but it was much sweeter than normal honey. Chapter 521. Xiaoqing made honey chicken drumsticks and chicken wings. Because the two men provided some raw materials, Xiaoqing let them eat together. Xiaoqing's culinary skills instantly conquered the two foreigners. They ate until their eyes were brimming with tears. They had probably not eaten such good food since the apocalypse. Furthermore, the culinary skills of the Chinese people, which had been accumulated for 5,000 years, was not something that the United States could compare with. The two foreigners' expressions were probably very eager to hug Xiaoqing's thighs and beg her to take them away. What were people born for? Wasn't it just to eat well, wear warm clothes, and satisfy their little needs? In this post-apocalyptic world, let's not talk about clothes first. At least they could eat well if they followed Xiaoqing. Unfortunately, Xiaoqing was not going to accept the two foreigners as her followers. She left after finishing her business. She couldn't just leave them here and take them back. Not to mention whether they would agree or not, the language barrier was a big problem. So in order to avoid all the trouble, it was best not to accept them. 2 days later, they finally arrived at the Chinatown Survivor Base. The Chinatown Survivor Base was not located in the original Chinatown, but because the whole base was almost all Chinese, and 80% of them came from Chinatown, they were lazy and named the base Chinatown Survivor Base. And it had been used until now, so it was estimated that the name was useless. The gate of the Chinatown Survivor Base was very strict. If you wanted to enter the base, you had to go through a lot of checks because the poisonous bees carried the zombie virus. As long as you were stung, there was a great chance that you would become a zombie. They had suffered like this before, so they were extra cautious. All ordinary people who wanted to enter the base had to go through several times more complicated checks than before. Xiaoqing and the others arrived at the gate, and the two foreigners immediately said that they knew someone who could simplify the check procedures. Xiaoqing smiled and said, "Leave it to us, we don't need to bother you." One of the two clerks immediately stepped forward and said to the guard, "Please inform your base chief that his guest has arrived." Although they came here openly, they still had to guard against the leaders of Country M. It was better to wait until this matter was settled before revealing their identities to Country M. The gatekeeper was stunned for a moment. In the end, he didn't act like a snob like in some novels and went in to report. The base chief of the Chinatown Survivor Base coincidentally had the surname Tang. When he heard that someone had come to the door and said that it was a guest he had invited, he was stunned. His first reaction was that someone was being pretentious. After thinking about it carefully, he remembered that he had contacted the Chinese government not long ago. He immediately jumped up and said to the person who came to report, "Go and call the deputy base commander and several regiment commanders over." Then, he hurriedly went to change his clothes. At the very least, he had to look more dignified so that others wouldn't think that he was looking down on the emissary from the Celestial Empire. He was one of the people who wanted to return to China. Probably because he was getting older, he always wanted to return to his roots. Even if he died, he was willing to die in the land that he dreamed of. Therefore, He was so cautious about the people from the Celestial Empire. Even if the other party might not be from the Celestial Empire, he had to see first. The base chief rushed to the gate with people and saw Xiaoqing and the others who were unfamiliar faces. At this moment, he knew that these people were likely to be from the Celestial Empire. Chapter 522. First of all, they were all people from the Celestial Empire. He didn't know all the people from the Celestial Empire in Country M, but at least he had seen them before. Even if he couldn't recognize them, he was always familiar with them. But he was sure that he hadn't seen these people before. Then they were likely to be from the Celestial Empire. As soon as the base chief came over, one of the two civilian staff greeted him and shook his hand very kindly. "Are you the base chief of the Chinatown Survivor Base? We are from our hometown." When he said that, the base chief understood and quickly said, "Let's go in and talk. It's not a good idea to stand here. If people see us, they will say that I'm not treating the guests well." The group of people went in happily. Xiaoqing walked behind them and carefully looked at the senior executives of the Chinatown Survivor Base. She felt that everyone wanted to go back to the Celestial Empire. After all, they already had a certain foundation in Country M. The huge Chinatown Survivor Base was one of the 3 largest bases in Country M. Ordinary people couldn't give up such a foundation. Even if Tang Yaozu could do it, what about the others? Deputy base chiefs and other senior executives, could they give up just like that? Even if they said they could, Xiaoqing wouldn't believe it. Who were they kidding? Since ancient times, there were only 3 things that attracted men the most: power, fame, and beauty. If they stayed in the Chinatown Survivor Base, these 3 things were easily available. When they returned to the Celestial Empire, everything had to start from scratch. As long as they had some utilitarian thoughts, they would know how to choose. Xiaoqing didn't like to speculate about people's evil intentions, but the fact was like this. If Tang Yaozu wanted to take people back, there must be some people who were willing to go back with him, and there must be some people who didn't want to go back. This was certain. It depended on what kind of thoughts they had. As long as it had nothing to do with Xiaoqing and they didn't hinder her, she was still very easy to talk to. Tang Yaozu took them to the living room of the main building and brewed tea. After everyone sat down, Tang Yaozu said excitedly, "I have been waiting for you for a long time." The matter of communicating with Tang Yaozu was naturally handed over to the 2 civilian staff. The role of the 2 of them was diplomacy. Also, the 2 of them were more reliable when it came to negotiations. As for other aspects, forget about them. At the very least, Tang Yaozu was smiling the entire time. In the end, it was decided that Tang Yaozu and the rest would return to China. Some of them would leave, while some would stay. Tang Yaozu still needed some time to arrange things after his departure, such as who to hand over the entire base to. Moreover, with so many people leaving, the strength of the base would definitely decrease. Chapter 523. Most of the survivors lived in the city and opened up a safe farm point around the city. However, once the city was besieged by zombies, the situation was not as good as the Chinatown Survivor Base. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Xiaoqing. Most of the people in her Jiang city were zombies, and only a small part of them were humans. They could live a self-sufficient life by opening up a small vegetable farm at the entrance. Thinking about it this way, there were advantages to becoming a zombie. They didn't have to worry about making a living, and they never had to worry about starving to death or being eaten by zombies. Thinking about it this way, it was great. They lived in the Chinatown Survivor Base, and all they did every day was eat, sleep, and walk. It was very leisurely. Especially Xiaoqing, those who knew her didn't dare to get close to her. Except for 2 foreigners, no one dared to come to her every day to eat and drink. As for Dai, he still ate and slept every day. He was either cultivating or sleeping. Xiaoqing was very worried. Dai should be about to level up. Every time he acted abnormally, it meant that he was about to level up. He had been at the peak of level 4 for a long time. This kind of advancement, others couldn't help him. The only thing Xiaoqing could do was take out all the high-level crystal nuclei. She didn't have many crystal nuclei suitable for Dai. She left a lot of crystal nuclei in Jiang City for Jiu Panpan and the others to cultivate. She didn't go out to hunt zombies during this period, so she didn't have many crystal nuclei. After the two of them used a lot these days, there weren't many crystal nuclei left. Dai was sleeping more and more. Xiaoqing was very worried. She checked Dai's body and found that his body couldn't bear the rapid absorption of energy. That was why he fell asleep. In the sleeping state, energy would be digested faster than usual. This was a good thing for Dai. However, the lack of crystal nuclei was still a problem. Xiaoqing had a terrible headache, so she called Qin Zishi. I'm going out to get some crystal nuclei. Can you help me guard Dai? You know the second King Yenluo's situation. I don't trust anyone else. Qin Zishi actually wanted to go out with them, but since Xiaoqing said so, he had to stay. Okay, Sister Qing. Be careful outside. Xiaoqing nodded and walked out. When she walked out, Zhu Morchen happened to be sitting on the doorstep, wiping his knife. When he heard that Xiaoqing was going out, he followed her. Let's go together. I'm bored anyway. One more person meant one more strength. Zhu Morchen wasn't a weakling, so Xiaoqing agreed. The two foreigners wanted to follow her, but Xiaoqing didn't let them. They were basically two ability users without any abilities. If they were weak, what was the point of following them? What a burden. After leading Zhu Morchen out, Xiaoqing met another person. This person was also standing among the higher-ups of the Chinatown survivor base that day. He must be one of the higher-ups of the Chinatown survivor base. He looked similar to Tang Yaozu, but he was young. He was only in his 20s. He was probably Tang Yaozu's relative, and he might even be his son. Even if he wasn't his son, he should be a close relative. Tang Yaozu looked kind and generous, but this young man's eyes had a hint of harshness. Xiaoqing didn't like him at first glance. As soon as Xiaoqing brought Zhu Morchen out, she was stopped by the smiling man. I met this young miss yesterday. I'm Tang Tianda. My father is Tang Yaozu. Young miss, you're the young miss. Your whole family is young miss. And you're so good at biting words. Who do you think you are? Xiaoqing mocked him expressionlessly. However, he was Tang Yaozu's son. She had to give him some face. I'm Xiaoqing. This is my friend, Zhu Morchen. Xiaoqing gave a simple introduction and prepared to leave. She still had things to do. How could she have time to chat with this playboy? Young Miss Xiao, please wait. Where are you planning to go? Could it be that you want to walk around the Chinatown survivor base? I'm the host. You should be looking for me for this kind of thing, Tang Tianda said with a smile. Although he was smiling, his smile was very annoying. At least, Xiaoqing hated him. This was because Tang Tianda looked like a lecher. I just want to go out and hunt zombies. Xiaoqing also said with a smile. Host, do you want to go together? Tang Tianda's expression immediately changed. She was such a beautiful woman. Why did she have such unique hobbies? Wasn't it good to go out and eat, drink, and chat? Not to hunt zombies. Chapter 524. This beautiful woman looked at Tang Tianda with an expression that said, do you dare or not? If you don't dare, I'll leave first. Tang Tianda was immediately enraged. Isn't it just hunting zombies? I'll take you there. Xiaoqing smiled and agreed, okay. She originally wanted to find someone to take her, but she didn't expect someone to deliver himself to her door. This was just right. Tang Tianda took two of his subordinates, plus Xiaoqing and Zhu Morchen, and left the door in a mighty manner. North of the Chinatown survivor base was the original Chinatown site. Because the original Chinatown was occupied by zombies, they had to retreat to the current city and build a new Chinatown survivor base. This was the closest to the Chinatown survivor base, and the place with the highest number of zombies. The enraged Tang Tianda very strongly wanted Xiaoqing to see his ability, but after arriving at the old Chinatown site, he somewhat regretted. Although he had two bodyguards with him, he didn't dare to guarantee that he could safely leave the old Chinatown site. After all, there were too many zombies inside. But he had already arrived at the place, and Xiao Qing was looking at him with a smile behind him. If he retreated at this time, he would really lose all his face. Tang Tianda encouraged himself and summoned up the courage to say, "This is the old Chinatown site. There are a lot of zombies inside. If we want to hunt zombies, let's come here." Okay. Xiao Qing carried the military knife and took the lead to step in. She stretched her neck and breathed a sigh of relief. It had been a long time since she came out to hunt zombies. Thinking about it, she still missed it. "Morchen, I'll be your support," Xiao Qing said lazily. Zhu Morchen's ability's damage was particularly high, and her damage was also high, but her ability to control was even higher. Rather than splitting up and hunting everywhere, it was better to cooperate. Zhu Morchen nodded and said, "I'll leave it to you." What he meant was that the safety of the two of them would be handed over to Xiao Qing, and he would only be responsible for attacking wildly. Tang Tianda was not satisfied. From the beginning, he wanted to chase after Xiao Qing. After all, he had not seen such a good girl like Xiao Qing for a long time. Although the girls in Country M had long legs and good figures, their skin was still lacking compared to the girls in China. Especially after the apocalypse, it was rare to see such a beautiful woman like Xiao Qing. It was no wonder that Tang Tianda's heart was itching. It could only be said that her beauty was alluring. However, he came to such a dangerous place like the old site of Chinatown for Xiao Qing, but Xiao Qing didn't even spare him a glance. Tang Tianda took a step forward and said, "You probably don't know, but this was the original Chinatown of J-City. It was the largest Chinatown in the entire Country M, with a population of more than 30,000. After the apocalypse, more than half of the people became zombies, and some were later infected. That is to say, there are at least 20,000 zombies here. You should follow behind me. Otherwise, what will you do if you encounter danger?" When he said this, he looked affectionately at Xiao Qing. "A delicate and cute woman like you should hide behind a man and enjoy life. Why come out and take risks? Is it because your boyfriend doesn't treat you well? Why don't you follow me? I will definitely treat you well." He was still very confident. What kind of woman could maintain such a beautiful appearance after the apocalypse? Either she was very strong, or she was kept as a mistress. Xiao Qing was most likely the latter. She was kept as a mistress, so why couldn't he? No matter what, he was still the son of the head of the Chinatown survivor base. Before the apocalypse, he was a proper second-generation rich, and the top kind. He was young and had a family background. Liking Xiao Qing was her fortune. Chapter 525. Xiao Qing laughed. She looked Tang Tianda up and down. Tang Tianda's appearance could only be considered average. Seriously speaking, he wasn't ugly or good-looking. His facial features were cold and gloomy, making it hard for people to have a good impression of him. Moreover, this person was very confident. Having confidence wasn't a bad thing, but having too much confidence was arrogance. Xiao Qing's gaze was too blatant, and there was even a hint of mockery in it. This mockery completely infuriated Tang Tianda. He looked around and found that there was no one around. Not everyone had the leisure to come to such a dangerous place. He looked at Zhu Morchen again. Zhu Morchen probably had some strength, but what use was that? Even in his territory, a powerful dragon couldn't suppress a local snake. Moreover, he didn't think that Zhu Morchen could be considered a dragon. Tang Tianda said to Zhu Morchen with his nose in the air, "Esteemed guest from the Heavenly Empire, please don't interfere with what I'm about to do. Otherwise, what does it matter if you're an esteemed guest from the Heavenly Empire? This is my territory, and I have 100 ways to make you disappear without a trace." Zhu Morchen couldn't help but grin. He really admired Tang Tianda's courage. He was very clear about Xiao Qing's strength and immediately stood to the side to watch a good show. Tang Tianda was very satisfied with his self-awareness and walked towards Xiao Qing. "Isn't it good to follow me? You can eat and drink well, and you don't need to come out and suffer. I'm willing to raise you and love you. You just need to be a delicate flower in my hands." Xiao Qing felt a bit disgusted. What the hell was a delicate flower? She had never thought that someone like her could be associated with the word delicate. She was more like a man-eating flower. For example, a big flower. Aside from feeling disgusted, she also wanted to laugh. If she stood in the capital and said that she wanted to find a man, she would probably scare a bunch of people away. But this Tang Tianda had actually delivered himself to her door. It was very interesting. "What did you just say you wanted to do with me in your hands?" Shao Qing asked with a smile. "Naturally, it's to be the love of my heart." Tang Tianda thought that he was about to succeed. He squinted his eyes and smiled. "I'll give you whatever you want. I want you to stay away from me." Shao Qing suddenly thought of this lame joke. The moment she said this, Tang Tianda's expression changed. If he still hadn't realized that he had been tricked, then he shouldn't be called Tang Tianda anymore. He should be called Second Fool Tang. Tang Tianda said with a cold face, "What do you mean, you're not willing to agree to my request? Let me ask you, where did you get such good self-awareness?" Shao Qing looked him up and down sarcastically. He was arrogant, ugly, and didn't have much ability. How could he be so arrogant? Chapter 526. Dealing with a weak woman like Shao Qing, wouldn't it be more than enough? The two metahumans were actually unwilling. After all, two people dealing with a weak woman was actually a very shameful thing. However, Tang Tianda had their salaries in his hands, and the two of them were not good people either. He immediately said, "Don't worry, it's a piece of cake." Then, the two of them rushed over. They obviously did not put Shao Qing in their eyes, one more arrogant than the other. One of them was a strengthening type metahuman. He immediately activated his ability and reached out to grab Shao Qing's shoulder. Shao Qing raised her hand, and vines drilled out from the ground. They effortlessly tied up the two of them. The moment the vines touched the skin of the two people, the sharp thorns pierced their skin and injected the poison. The moment their skin was pierced, they could no longer use their abilities. The two of them were like two dead pigs, hanging in the air by the vines. It had to be said that Shao Qing's vines had evolved a little after subduing Little Red. Its thorns had started to suck blood. Although it was not as good as Little Red, it was still very easy to suck two people dry. However, Shao Qing did not directly kill the two of them. She kept them alive because she still had a use for them. Tang Tianda was stunned on the spot. He also thought that Shao Qing would struggle, and he also thought that there would be a fight. He also thought that there would be a stalemate, but he did not expect that Shao Qing would directly kill the two of them. It was an instant kill. The two of them had just activated their abilities, and in the blink of an eye, they were already hung up. If this was not an instant kill, then what was? Shao Qing hooked her finger, and immediately, a vine dragged Tang Tianda over. A level 3 metahuman, Shao Qing did not even put him in her eyes. Saying that he was an instant kill was already praising him. "What do you want to do?" Tang Tian asked. Shao Qing said lazily, "What do you think I want to do?" Tang Tianda swallowed his saliva and said, "I'm the son of the chief of the Chinatown survivor base. If you touch me, you'll die too. My father will not let you off." Shao Qing chuckled and said, "Doesn't it sound like what the villain on TV says before he dies?" Zhu Morchen nodded with a serious expression. "Yes." Tang Tianda's face was filled with despair as he struggled, "You can't kill me. Otherwise, you, the man in your tent, and the one beside you will all die. You can't bear my father's revenge. Let me go and I can pretend that nothing happened. What happened today was my fault. I apologize to you." Shao Qing smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't kill you." Tang Tianda thought that Shao Qing was convinced and breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he said, "I will never tell anyone about what happened today. I was blinded by greed. Miss Shao, please forgive me." Although he said that, his lowered eyes were full of viciousness. Now that his life was in Shao Qing's hands, he naturally did not dare to say anything. When he was rescued and returned to the Chinatown survivor base, he could do whatever he wanted with revenge. As a man, of course, he had to be flexible. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. He kept comforting himself, and then fantasized about how he would catch Shao Qing after returning to the Chinatown survivor base. He would torture Shao Qing, rape her, then kill her, and so on. Then, he was lifted up by Shao Qing. He was shocked. Didn't you say you wouldn't kill me? Yeah, I didn't say I was going to kill you. Xiao Qing lazily used vines to lift the three people and took Zhu Morchen deeper inside. She disliked the three people for being noisy, so she used vines to block their mouths. After taking Zhu Morchen to a location near the city center, Xiao Qing said, "Are we going to do it here?" Zhu Morchen nodded. "Let's do it here." He already vaguely knew what Xiao Qing was going to do. He couldn't help but sigh. Xiao Qing was really skilled and daring. "We'll split the crystal cores 40 to 60. I'll take 60. You don't have any objections, right?" Xiao Qing said. Zhu Morchen agreed. Even if he took 40, he would definitely take advantage. He had seen the speed at which Xiao Qing killed zombies. He had stayed here for a day, but the number of zombies he killed was probably less than the number of zombies he killed in an hour with Xiao Qing. "Then let's start." Xiao Qing raised her hand. First, she released Guang Guang to protect the two of them. Then, she also released Xiao Hong. Xiao Hong was entrenched on Guang Guang's body. A gorgeous flower bloomed, and it looked a little arrogant. Then, Xiao Qing hung up the three people tied up by vines. Using the military knife in her hand, she cut open their thighs. Fresh blood suddenly flowed out. The three people who didn't know what she was going to do turned pale. Soon, they knew what Xiao Qing was going to do, because the zombies who smelled the blood had already rushed over like flies. Chapter 527. This was a very good bait, and it saved them the trouble of looking for zombies. Xiao Qing lifted the three of them up high, so high that the zombies couldn't bite them. Moreover, the wounds on their legs weren't big, so they could bleed for a long time without dying. After the zombies that smelled the blood rushed over, Xiao Qing began to move. She stretched out her hand, and countless vines came out of the ground as if they were alive. Any zombies that came close were all tied up by the vines. Xiao Qing didn't use a lot of strength, so it only took a few seconds for the zombies to break free. However, there was still Zhu Morchen at the side. After Xiao Qing controlled the zombies, Zhu Morchen made his move. He dug into his pocket and took out a few black pellets from his fingertips. He said to Xiao Qing, "Can you gather them into a pile?" Xiao Qing nodded, and the vines gathered together, dragging the zombies together. At this time, Zhu Morchen jumped up, and the pellets flew out from his fingertips and landed in the pile of zombies. In the next second, the pellets that flew out from his fingertips all exploded. It was like a few bags of explosives, exploding into the crowd of zombies. Other than a few lucky zombies, the rest of the zombies were blown into pieces. Xiao Qing released Die Hua, and Die Hua took Xiao Hong and happily began to clean up the battlefield. Xiao Hong was responsible for extending its tentacles and gathering the zombies' corpses together, while Die Hua was responsible for eating. After eating, it would obediently spit out the crystal nuclei. This was because Die Hua knew that if it didn't spit them out, it would be torn apart by Xiao Qing to be squeezed into juice. As a flower that knew how to adapt to circumstances, it was still quite smart. It secretly ate 2 crystal nuclei without being discovered, so it just had to spit out the majority of them. Soon, there was a small mountain of crystal nuclei next to Die Hua. Then, the zombies smelled the blood and continuously rushed over. They were continuously killed by Xiao Qing and Zhu Morchen. The crystal nuclei next to Die Hua piled up more and more. Not to mention Zhu Morchen, who knew Xiao Qing better, even Tang Tianda and the others who were in danger were dumbfounded. They now knew what kind of killing god they had provoked. Perhaps Xiao Qing alone could slaughter the current Chinatown survivor base. Tang Tianda's face was completely pale, because he knew very well that even if he returned to his own territory, he wouldn't be able to kill Xiao Qing. Right now, he could only hope that Xiao Qing would remember her promise and spare his life. Otherwise, even if Xiao Qing killed him, his death would be in vain. No one would have the ability to avenge him. As the saying goes, if you often walk by the river, how can your shoes not get wet? The first time his shoes got wet, he met a peerless iron plate like Xiao Qing. Other than his bad character, there was no other explanation. Xiao Qing was multitasking. While controlling the vines to capture zombies, she sat next to Die Hua and began to count the crystal nuclei. She divided the crystal nuclei into 2 piles. A small pile for Zhu Morchen, and a large pile for her. She really was the kind of person who could use them for a few months after coming out to hunt. After about an hour, the pile of crystal nuclei was enough to drown Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing stretched and said, "How about we stop here for today? I think there's quite a lot." Zhu Morchen was still in a state of shock. He had lived for so many years, but he had never felt like today that zombies were so easy to kill. They were simply a pile of wooden people. They could be killed at will, and they didn't even fight back. He just had to stand aside and throw metal balls. So when Xiaoqing called him, he was still in a state of shock, so he just nodded foolishly. Chapter 528. Xiaoqing handed the small pile to Zhu Morchen, then said, "This is your share. You can count them yourself." "I don't need to count," Zhu Morchen said honestly. "There's too many of them. You can help me keep them. I don't have any storage space. You can give them to me when we return to the country." Xiaoqing thought for a moment, then said, "Okay." Zhu Morchen picked up a few high-leveled crystal cores for his daily use. The rest were all given to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing was just about to put away Da Hua and the others and leave when she suddenly heard an angry scream. She stopped in her tracks. In any case, not far away, several black dots were jumping all the way from the rooftops and rushing over. When she got closer, she discovered that these dots were all zombies. Moreover, they were all at least level 4. There were even level 5 zombie kings. Moreover, there were 3 level 5 zombie kings. Xiaoqing more or less understood. There was always a boss among the zombies in every place. She had killed so many of their subordinates, so the boss had come looking for her. Tang Tianda's already pale face became even paler. He said dejectedly, "Big sister, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. You have to listen to me on this. These zombies are all very high-leveled. We can't beat them. Can you put me down and let's run together?" Xiaoqing ignored him. She just stretched her body, then sighed and said, "There aren't any level 6 zombies. If there were a few level 6 zombies, she could get a few level 6 zombie crystal cores. She might be able to break through to level 7 today. A few level 4 and level 5 zombies, to put it bluntly, she really didn't care about them. Maybe there really are level 6 zombies. After all, this is such a big Chinatown." Zhu Morchen frowned and said, "Maybe they're watching us from the shadows." Xiaoqing rubbed her chin, then said, "Do you want to practice? If you don't want to practice, then leave it to me. I'm worried that her Dai will be worried when she wakes up and doesn't see me." "I'll leave it to you," Zhu Morchen said self-deprecatingly. "I'll hold the line." Xiaoqing nodded and slowly stretched her waist. Then, she directly launched her attack. Although Tang Tianda and the others had seen Xiaoqing's control ability before, they did not directly face her strength. They did not have any concept of her strength until now. Xiaoqing directly rushed towards those zombies. At the same time, vines drilled out from her back, completely covering her body. By the time Tang Tianda and the others saw Xiaoqing again, she was already in the middle of the zombie horde. She was grabbing a zombie's head with each hand and twisting it easily, twisting it off. Then, the 2 heads were casually thrown away by Xiaoqing as if she was throwing away garbage. The eyebrows of the people watching twitched. Xiaoqing calmly shuttled through the zombie horde. Again. Xiaoqing grabbed the young zombie's neck and threw him to the ground. The young zombie roared powerlessly and stretched out his hand to scratch Xiaoqing. Then, he was thrown aside by Xiaoqing. The young zombie immediately rushed over again. In a few minutes, Xiaoqing threw him to the ground again. Although he was also a level 6 zombie, after all, he was much weaker than Xiaoqing. Even if Xiaoqing did not use her superpower, he was no match for Xiaoqing. Tang Tianda and the others were stunned. They had never seen anyone who could fight with a zombie bare-chested. No, it was a one-sided beating. This zombie was a level 6 zombie king. Level 6. It could form a zombie tide and destroy a large base. Also, Xiaoqing was a wood superpower user. A level 6 zombie king was being beaten by Xiaoqing like a child. This was too unreal. Tang Tianda could not help but ask Zhu Morchen, is she really a human? Is she really not a level 7 zombie in disguise? Chapter 529. The young zombie had been dominating the old site of Chinatown for a long time. He had never been bullied like this before. He felt wronged and angry at that time. He bared his teeth and rushed up again and again like a beast. Again and again, he was beaten to the ground by Xiaoqing. He looked particularly pitiful. Every time he got up, he was particularly tenacious. His clothes were tattered. Xiaoqing looked at the time. According to the usual practice, Dai should be waking up at this time. She must go back first. At least, she had to get home before Dai woke up. Otherwise, if Dai couldn't see her, it would definitely turn the sky upside down. Therefore, Xiaoqing was ready to end this quickly. She wanted to take this level 6 nucleus home and appease her little Dai. While they were still in the Chinatown survivor base, which was a relatively safe place, she quickly upgraded the Dai. Otherwise, if the Dai suddenly upgraded halfway after leaving the Chinatown survivor base, the two of them might have to have sex in the wild. It was too shameful to use the sky as a blanket and the ground as a bed. Quickly stopping her shameless thoughts, Xiaoqing coughed, raised her hand, and prepared to kill the zombie. But sometimes, especially when people were unlucky, it was easy to do things with twists and turns, such as now. Xiaoqing was just about to end everything in front of her and leave with the harvest when someone wanted to interfere. Stop! An anxious and frightened female voice rang out. Following her voice was a dagger that flew over. Xiaoqing frowned. She held the weak dagger in her palm and looked at the person. The person who ran over was a woman. She looked young, in her 20s. Her ability was not strong, at most level 3. But how could a woman with only level 3 ability survive in a place with so many zombies? After the woman ran over, she immediately hugged the young zombie lying on the ground, pressed his head, and then looked at Xiaoqing in horror. Please let him go. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything. The rebellious young zombie was pressed in the arms of the girl. Although he still bared his teeth and looked unconvinced, he carefully put away his nails for fear of hurting the girl. Xiaoqing was stunned. Except for her own friends, she had never seen people and zombies get along so peacefully. Xiaoqing was stunned for a long time, and then asked, "You raised him?" The girl hesitated for a moment, and then nodded. Today, the young zombie, who was very gentle and let her comb his hair, suddenly ran out crazily. She was only a level 3 paranormal, and her ability was useless. She couldn't keep up with the young zombie at all. When she caught up, she saw Xiaoqing about to kill the young zombie. She was scared out of her wits. With the young zombie's strength, it was very safe in the Chinatown survivor base. There was no one and no zombies that could be his opponent. She didn't expect that Xiaoqing would suddenly appear. The girl was desperate. She only thought that today was definitely over. After all, who would let go of a level 6 zombie and a person who raised zombies? He was my junior. He chased me for a long time. Later, when the apocalypse happened, we happened to be in school. He came to find me and took me away from the school full of zombies. He has always been protecting me. Otherwise, with my weakness, I would have become a zombie's food. Later, in order to protect me, he attracted zombies. I hid in the car and watched him being surrounded by zombies. Only then did I realize that I had fallen in love with him. The girl's tears slowly overflowed. At that moment, I awakened my ability. I thought I could save him, but I found out that my awakened ability was very weak. Zombies wouldn't hurt me, they would treat me as one of their kind. I went back to the zombie group and brought him out. But no matter how hard I tried, he became a zombie. Later, he begged me, "Ayun, kill me. I don't want to become a zombie, I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to eat people." But how could I bear to do that? This is my lover. I would rather he become a monster, I would rather he never remember me, than kill him. According to my estimation, zombies should have the ability to express themselves around level 7 or 8. Xiaoqing continued, if you have the ability, you can give him more high-level zombie nuclei to cultivate. It will be faster this way. So that's how it is. The young girl suddenly understood. After we lived here, Mingyi often went out to hunt zombies. There was a level 6 zombie here, but Mingyi was only level 5 at that time. When I wasn't paying attention, he went out to fight it alone. He came back with bruises all over his body. He insisted on giving me a nucleus, but I didn't use it. The young girl took out a nucleus from her sachet and handed it to Xiaoqing. This is for you. Take it as a thank you gift for not hurting Mingyi. You can give it to him. Maybe he can directly rise to level 6. Xiaoqing didn't accept it, and said lightly. She always had a faint good impression of this young girl. It was probably because they had a similar fate that made her feel pity for the young girl. This was probably the feeling of sympathizing with each other. Take it. I can feel that Mingyi is slowly recovering. I think you probably need a level 6 nucleus more than me. The young girl smiled. Mingyi is fine. I'm already very satisfied. Xiaoqing hesitated a little, and took the nucleus. She really needed the nucleus. This level 6 nucleus was enough for Dai to rise to level 6. She especially hoped that after Dai rose to level 6, he would be able to call out her name fluently. If there is a chance, I will compensate you. Xiaoqing said lightly. The young girl just smiled, and then held the young zombie's hand. The young zombie's throat kept making impatient sounds, but he obediently let the young girl hold him. He could probably feel the fear and lingering fear in the young girl's heart. He would secretly use his palm to touch the young girl's hair to comfort her. Xiaoqing couldn't help but smile because of the warm atmosphere. She asked the young girl, "Have you ever thought of leaving? Go back to the Celestial Empire. I have built a city in the Celestial Empire called Jiang City. There are all my kind there." The young girl was moved for a moment, but she shook her head in the end. "Actually, I really want to go back to my hometown. But forget it. I have built our home here. After staying here for a long time, I don't want to change places. If Mingyi recovers, maybe we will go back. At that time, we will look for you." "Okay." Xiaoqing stood up, and then said, "The door of Jiang City will always be open for you." "Thank you." The young girl smiled shyly, and then said, "My name is Jiang Yun. He is Lan Mingyi. What about you?" "Xiaoqing." Xiaoqing waved her hand. "If fate wills it, we will meet again." Then she turned around and left. Tang Tianda, who didn't hear the whole process, was stunned. A second ago, they were still fighting. How did it end peacefully? Moreover, it was a zombie. Women were really strange creatures. Chapter 531. Xiaoqing left without any reluctance. She was still carrying the 3 living creatures and Zhu Morchen. She looked very relaxed. This was Jiang Yun and Lan Ming's paradise. If the 2 of them didn't want to be disturbed, she wouldn't rashly disturb them. Xiaoqing knew that the 2 of them would live very well. When they returned to the survival base in Chinatown, it was already past Dai's usual time to wake up. When Xiaoqing arrived at the gate, she put down the 3 people and calmly threatened them. "I didn't kill you not because I don't have the ability, but because I'm too lazy to do it. I'm sure the 3 of you are very clear about this. I'll give you 2 choices. First, forget everything that happened today and pretend that nothing happened. Second, you don't need to go back." Tang Tianda was really obedient this time. "We only came out to kill zombies today. We didn't encounter many zombies, so we came back. Did anything else happen? Why didn't I know about it?" Xiaoqing's face was full of satisfaction. She let go of the 3 people and said indifferently, "Slap your own face. Your face is so pale, who are you trying to show it to?" When the 3 people heard Xiaoqing's words, they immediately slapped their faces. After a while, their faces turned red. They were afraid that Xiaoqing would feed them to the big flower. "Okay, if you keep slapping your face, it's going to swell. Let's go." Xiaoqing calmly led the way. The group of people returned to the survival base in Chinatown. When they returned to the base, she couldn't help but quicken her pace. What if Dai couldn't find her and went crazy? Xiaoqing wasn't worried that her die would hurt others because of his madness. She was only worried that others would find out that her die wasn't right and hurt him. The few people behind her couldn't keep up with her speed and were left far behind. Xiaoqing quickly returned to the place where they were temporarily staying. Along the way, she didn't find any panic and was very calm. After opening the door, she realized that her die had not gone crazy. He was sitting on the sofa, hugging his knees and staring blankly out the window. When he heard the door open, he quickly turned his head. When he saw that it was Xiaoqing, he pounced on her. Xiaoqing's first reaction was to heave a big sigh of relief, and then her heart ached. Her die was too obedient. The more obedient he was, the more sorry Xiaoqing felt. "Have you eaten anything? I left some food in the fridge and left a note at the bedside." Xiaoqing touched Dai's head and said. Dai shook his head slowly, and then plunged into Xiaoqing's arms sadly. When he opened his eyes, he realized that Xiaoqing was gone. He couldn't smell Xiaoqing in the whole house, so he was not in the mood to look at the note. At that moment, he almost went crazy. If it weren't for the fact that he was gradually recovering, he would have rushed out to find Xiaoqing. After forcing himself to calm down, Dai sat on the sofa and didn't go anywhere. He quietly waited for Xiaoqing to come back. He knew that Xiaoqing would never leave him alone. She must have gone out to do something and would be back soon. Dai just waited like that. Time passed little by little, but surprisingly, he didn't get irritated. He was very quiet. Perhaps even the time he waited was warm in his eyes, because the person he was waiting for was Xiaoqing. "Good boy, let's eat first." Xiaoqing opened the fridge and was about to take out the food that she had prepared earlier to heat up. Halfway through, she changed her mind and directly made a new dish. When she was cooking, Dai followed behind her obediently. Wherever she went, Dai followed. He didn't make a fuss, and just watched Xiaoqing quietly. Chapter 532. Sometimes, Xiaoqing would pick up a piece of cooked food and put it in his mouth. The scene was very warm. After the meal was ready, the two sat around the table and ate. After eating, Xiaoqing took out the 6th rank crystal core from her pocket and gave it to Dumbo. Then she took out a lot of 4th and 5th rank crystal cores from the space and patted Dumbo's head. "Go and cultivate. Once you break through, I'll take you out to hunt." Dumbo nodded and said, "All right, I'll take you with me." Dai took the nuclei and went to cultivate. After he went back to the room, Xiaoqing didn't rest. Xiaoqing sat outside, holding a nucleus and absorbing it. Since she got the red soil, she had broken through to level 6. These days, she had been using the red soil and the high-level nuclei to cultivate. Now, the energy in her body was basically saturated. She only needed an opportunity to break through to the 7th level. At that time, she wouldn't dare to say anything else, but at least among the superpowered people, her strength would definitely be considered as one of the top few. Naturally, the stronger one was, the better. The stronger one was, the safer one's companions would be, and the more capable one would be to protect the people one wanted to protect. The most painful thing in the world was to watch one's companions get hurt or unable to do anything. Especially in this post-apocalyptic world, there were dangers everywhere. Strength was the prerequisite for everything. If one wanted to live a good life, one needed strength. If one wanted to protect one's companions and friends, one needed strength. If one didn't want to be bullied, one still needed strength. Even the most basic right to speak required strength. If one didn't have strength, others wouldn't listen to one's words because it was meaningless. Xiaoqing was thinking about how to become stronger all the time. The road to becoming stronger had no end. Xiaoqing just needed to be one step faster than others. That was enough. They didn't talk for the whole night. Both of them were cultivating and didn't even dare to sleep. Dai didn't sleep, and Xiaoqing didn't dare to sleep. She was afraid that her die would suddenly break through, or something would happen during the breakthrough. She didn't have time to react, so she simply didn't sleep. Anyway, for her now, it wasn't a big deal to not sleep for one night. After midnight, when it was almost dawn, there was a strange fluctuation in Dai's room. At that moment, Xiaoqing knew that Dai had broken through. She quickly went to Dai's room, but she didn't intervene. She was more nervous than Dai, even though it was Dai's breakthrough. Xiaoqing was afraid that Dai's breakthrough would cause some problems. After all, it was proven that the higher the level of zombies, the higher their intelligence. What if Dummy awakened his memory when he broke through, or directly forgot the time when he was dummy? What about that period of time? Xiaoqing wanted to know the situation of Dai's breakthrough as soon as possible. Xiaoqing sat cross-legged at the door, staring at Dai. Dai was at the most critical moment of his breakthrough. Success or failure, it was just a moment. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't nervous. After Xiaoqing released the flower, she calmly pulled it to her side. Then, she grabbed the flower's leaves with one hand and the flower's petals with the other. She used so much strength that the flower kept shaking its head in pain. No matter how smart it was just a flower. It couldn't even make a sound, let alone beg for mercy. Xiaoqing held the flower expressionlessly and ravaged the flower's leaves and petals. She looked calm, but she couldn't control her nervousness and was about to jump up. Just as her heart jumped to her throat, the weird breath on Dumbo's body dispersed. He suddenly opened his eyes, and there was a sharp and deep light in his eyes. As he opened his eyes, a mighty pressure spread out in all directions. The breakthrough was successful. If someone was in the wild, they would find that the mutant animals and zombies near the Chinatown survivor base were crazily running away. They all noticed Dai's breakthrough. The breakthrough from level 5 to level 4 was very big. Just like in a zombie group, there might be many level 5 zombies, but there must be only one level 6 zombie. After all, a mountain couldn't have two tigers, unless one was male and the other was female. For zombies, they didn't have the concept of male and female. So in a zombie group, there was usually only one zombie with the highest level. The mutant animals and zombies wandering around were all independent and didn't have a group. So when they felt that a new king was born, they quickly ran away. They ran very fast, as if they were afraid that Dai would run out and do something to them. At the moment when dummy Dai broke through, Xiaoqing was also extremely nervous. She suddenly grasped the big flower tightly and directly tore off a petal. Please have a moment of silence for the poor flower. The poor flower was in so much pain that it jumped in place. As soon as Dumbo too broke through, he slowly withdrew his aura. His eyes looked very wise and far-sighted, with a hint of profoundness. He was not at all like the usual Dumbo too. Xiaoqing panicked and couldn't help but shout, Dai. Dai, who was originally unfathomable, immediately returned to the way he was before the breakthrough. He happily jumped into Xiaoqing's arms. There was no trace of his previous wisdom, as if everything was just Xiaoqing's illusion. More importantly, his strength increased after the breakthrough, and he couldn't control it for a while, so he directly pushed Xiaoqing down. Xiaoqing's back hit the ground hard. If she wasn't a zombie, she might have broken bones. Chapter 533. After Dai was upgraded, the heavy burden on Xiaoqing's heart was lifted. She fell asleep with Dai in her arms. Naturally, she did not notice that Dai was lying in her arms with his eyes closed and his cheeks flushed red. He vaguely remembered that when he was still called Fu Jingshan, he was in contact with darkness, and darkness every day. His father, who was obsessed with women, brought his mistress and an older child into the family the moment his mother died. His brother, who was filled with jealousy, tried to kill him several times. The most serious time was when he was pushed down the stairs and had to get stitches on his head. His father never visited him in the hospital. In the end, his father said indifferently, "Why didn't you be more careful?" At that time, he knew that other than himself, no one would care about his life. Even his relatives only got close to him for money. His last memory was when Fu Jingmo pushed him into a group of zombies. Then, he was drowned by the zombies. It was a heart-wrenching, bone-piercing pain. After that, it was the only warm sun in his life. There was a woman who would gently cut his nails for him. She would scold him when he dug out the nucleus that was covered in brain matter and wanted to eat it. Then, she would wash the nucleus and pass it to him. She would gently protect him and protect him under her wings. She was willing to sacrifice herself to save him. Fu Jingsheng would always remember that woman carrying him and walking out of the capital step by step. She was indomitable and there was a pool of blood under her feet. She said, "So what if I have to go against the whole world for you?" In this world, Fu Jingsheng could not find a second person who would treat him like that. Towards Fu Jingmo, he had a moment of resentment. Then, he felt lucky. He felt lucky that Fu Jingmo pushed him into the group of zombies. Otherwise, with his personality, even if he met Xiao Qing would definitely not like him. Selfish, cold, and antisocial. Right now, he urgently needed to confirm that he had such warmth and that this was not a dream. The next day, when Xiao Qing woke up, she felt that the thing she was hugging had changed its position. Like an octopus, it wrapped itself around her tightly. "Wake up, baby." Xiao Qing was hugged so tightly that she couldn't get up and wash up. She could only wake up Dai in her arms. Dai was obviously not fully awake. He blinked his eyes and said sleepily, "Sleepy." Xiao Qing did not react at first. She reached out to grab the clothes. Halfway through, she suddenly realized that Dai had spoken. She was so surprised and happy that her fingertips were trembling. In the end, she hugged Dai and said, "Say it again, say it again." Dai was also stunned. He had never seen Xiao Qing lose her self-control like this. He was stunned and did not know how to react. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Qing." At that moment, Xiao Qing felt that she was going to cry. She hugged Dai tightly and did not want to let go. She was so excited that she did not know what to say. She had waited for this day for too long. Xiao Qing still remembered how happy she was when Dai spoke for the first time with difficulty. This time, Dai really knew how to speak. However, probably because Dai had not spoken for too long, he could only speak one word at a time. Sometimes, he would even stutter. Xiao Qing was very patient. She brushed her teeth and cooked dinner. After the two of them ate, she patiently taught Dai how to speak. Dai spoke like a child. Not only did he speak one word at a time, but he also could not speak clearly. Sometimes, Xiao Qing had to think for a long time before she could understand what Dai was saying. Chapter 534. She took out a book from her space that was used to teach children. The reason she had put this book in her space was actually for little Bun. She didn't think that she would end up using it on Dai. Dai looked a bit slow, but her learning speed wasn't slow. By the time Zhu Morchen came to find her, Dai was already able to say an entire sentence word by word. For example, Qing wants to eat fried soy sauce noodles. This was one of the first few sentences that Dai learned. Normal people probably wouldn't be able to understand the thoughts of a foodie. "I'll make it for you tonight." Xiao Qing rubbed Dai's head. Then, she heard someone knock on the door. She walked over and opened the door. The person outside was Zhu Morchen. These past few days, they've already discussed with Tang Yaozu how to take the people away and other issues. They're going to meet the current ruler of M country. "Do you want to go with them?" Xiao Qing thought for a bit, then shook her head and said, "I won't be participating in this. Call me when you're forming a small team and going out to investigate the source of the insect plague." "Okay." Zhu Morchen nodded, then said, "Then I'll be leaving first." Xiao Qing nodded and sent Zhu Morchen off. She was too lazy to participate in that kind of pompous meeting where even a few words had to be tactful. It was better to stay at home and accompany Dai. Dai had just learned how to speak, and she was at her most curious. Her favorite thing to do was to point at something and have Dai call out its name. Dai was so worried that her eyebrows were knitted together, making her look especially pitiful. In the afternoon, Xiao Qing looked at the time and prepared to go out to buy groceries and cook. She didn't want to leave Dai alone at home, and Dai didn't want to be alone at home either, so the two of them went out together. After going out, Xiao Qing was still in a state of excitement. She pointed at the car and asked Erdai, pointed at the house and asked Erdai, and pointed at the people and asked Erdai. Erdai was stunned. He knew it was a car, but he didn't know what brand it was. He knew that it was a house, but he didn't know if it was a restaurant or an arcade. He could differentiate between men and women, but he really didn't know their names. From this, it could be seen how unreliable Xiaoqing was when she was excited. "Baby, what are we eating tonight?" As soon as Xiaoqing entered the market, she began to ask Erdai. Erdai was afraid that she would suddenly ask him, "Do you know what kind of vegetable this is?" He hurriedly said, "Fried, sauce, noodles." He had eaten Xiaoqing's jjiang noodles once before, and it tasted amazing. Since then, he could not forget about it. "Jjiang noodles. I almost forgot about it." Xiaoqing touched her chin. She pulled Erdai to buy the ingredients to make jjiang noodles. She definitely needed streaky pork, but she couldn't find the meat she wanted in the market. So, she could only go out of the city to hunt. She still had a few bottles of bean paste, which she got from some stores at the beginning of the apocalypse. She needed some cucumbers, radishes, and green onions. Besides jjiang noodles, she also needed to make something else, because it would be boring to only eat jjiang noodles. So, in addition to the ingredients to make jjiang noodles, she also bought some other things. When she was shopping, she found that there was mangosteen in the base. It was very fresh. After peeling it, the meat inside was white and looked very delicious. Xiaoqing couldn't help but buy some. On the way back, she met Tang Tianda. Before Xiaoqing said a word, Tang Tianda was like a virgin who was about to be molested by a hooligan. He screamed and almost hid in the bodyguard's arms. Chapter 535. This time, the bodyguard following him had changed, but he was still tall and strong. The bodyguard who was used as a safe haven was stunned for a moment and stammered, "Young Master Tang, I don't like men." He frowned, probably because he felt that his cucumber was about to be tarnished. But he was a straight man, until he had no friends. Tang Tianda, who was originally very nervous, became angry. "Even if I want to find a man, I won't find one with your looks." The other bodyguard's face was numb. Did that mean that he admitted that he liked men? Tang Tianda obviously didn't realize what he had said. He was very reserved and said to Xiaoqing with some fear, "Young Master Xiao." Captain, I'm really just passing by this time." Xiaoqing nodded and didn't prepare to do anything to him. Then, Erdai jumped on her like a bear and hugged her tightly. The jealousy on his face was very obvious. Xiaoqing, who hadn't felt Erdai's jealousy for a long time, suddenly felt a little happy in her heart. This was probably the legendary coquettish on the outside. Xiaoqing, who was cold on the outside, responded lazily and prepared to go home with the dummy on her back. It took a long time to prepare the sauce for the jjiangmian noodles. Plus, she had to start cooking earlier so as not to delay dinner. Otherwise, dinner would become a midnight snack. Tang Tianda suddenly stopped Xiaoqing. "Wait, Captain Xiao." It was obvious that he was a little hesitant. Moreover, he was very afraid of Xiaoqing. It was very strange that he could stop Xiaoqing. Tang Tianda stammered, "I have something to talk to you about." Xiaoqing looked at the time and said, 10 minutes. "Don't delay my cooking time." Tang Tianda hurriedly said, "Okay." Then, he consciously followed Xiaoqing. The two bodyguards looked at each other and felt bitter. This young Master Tang couldn't be interested in Xiaoqing, right? She was a good woman. Young Master Tang couldn't be planning to force himself on her after failing to woo her, right? He had done similar things many times. Although they were helpless, they still had to follow because their mission was to protect Tang Tianda. After returning to the place where they lived, Erdai obediently became a small tail. Wherever Xiaoqing went, Erdai followed. Tang Tianda sat on the sofa cautiously and watched Xiaoqing arrange the vegetables and fruits she bought. Then, she took a few mangosteens, peeled the pulp, sprinkled an unknown powder, put it on a plate, and brought it over. Tang Tianda subconsciously reached for the plate and said, "Thank you." But he didn't take it. Xiaoqing calmly put the plate in front of Erdai. She touched Erdai's head and said to Erdai, "Eat less. There will be noodles with soy sauce later." Then she said to Tang Tienda, "It's not for you. Fucking retard." After she was done, Xiaoqing sat on the sofa. Erdai immediately stuffed a piece of mangosteen over. Xiaoqing opened her mouth and bit it. Then, she asked in a muffled voice, "What do you want to say to me?" Tang Tienda said to the two bodyguards, "You two go out first." The two bodyguards looked at each other and didn't want to go out. They especially wanted to persuade Tang Tienda. "Why can't you take a fancy to someone? Can't you see that she has a pretty boy by her side? Don't tell me you want to send us away so that you can play with the pretty boy and force yourself on her." They decided to go outside obediently. Even if they heard the sound of Tang Tienda and his wife hitting each other, they wouldn't go in. Because Tang Tienda asked them to leave. Chapter 536. They had been displeased with this son of a bitch for a long time. After the two bodyguards left, Tang Tienda said honestly, "It's like this. My father has always wanted to go back to China because he feels that he is an outsider in M country. So even if he has to start over after going back, even if it takes a long time to rebuild a base as big as the current Chinatown survivor base, or even if there is no way to restore the glory in M country, it doesn't matter as long as he can return to his homeland." But some people don't think so. They think that M country is very good. They already have so much power. Why should they go back to China and start over? So there was a disagreement. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, although there was a disagreement, it has been resolved. Some people are willing to go back to China and leave with my father. The others don't want to go back and stay to run the Chinatown survivor base. Isn't this a happy ending for everyone? Speaking up to this point, Tang Tienda's face was full of distress. But recently, I felt that something was wrong, especially after you guys came here and discussed with my father about returning to the country. My father changed a lot. He often frowned and even sent two especially strong experts to be my bodyguards. His eyes were always filled with worry, giving me the feeling that he was afraid that something would happen to me. So, Xiaoqing leaned on Erdai's thigh in boredom. Erdai immediately massaged her temples. The scene looked very decadent. Tang Tienda was a little envious of Xiaoqing's carefree attitude, but he still said honestly, "I know that you are very strong. Even if 100 paranormals were to fight against you, they would be nothing more than food. I just hope that if an accident happens one day, you can lend a helping hand to my father. Please." He had never been a good person. He was a playboy. The bad things he had done could be written into a 10-meter-long scroll. But even if he was a bad person, he had his own merits. His only merit was probably filial piety. Tang Tienda's mother passed away very early, and his father was busy with his career, so he didn't really care about him. Before the apocalypse, he was just a good-for-nothing rich kid who did nothing but squander. He often went against Tang Yaozu. It wasn't until the apocalypse that he realized that his father actually loved him very much. Tang Tienda, who was originally very rebellious, although he was still a loafer, he finally began to understand his old father. He had no ability or wisdom, but he had a beast-like intuition. He always felt that the entire Chinatown survivor base looked calm, but it had a sense of foreboding. Coupled with his father's unusual behavior, he couldn't help but beg Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing stared at Tang Tienda with her clear eyes. After a while, she said, "Why should I help you?" Chapter 537. Many fruits and vegetables went extinct after the doomsday because they were too delicate and couldn't withstand the harsh environment after the doomsday. Even if they were planted in artificial greenhouses, they couldn't survive. However, these fruits and vegetables were no problem in Tang Tienda's hands. The mangosteens that Xiaoqing bought were planted by Tang Tienda. It was all related to his superpower. Therefore, whenever someone in the base found a high-level zombie nuclei that could help with superpower users, they would give them to Tang Tienda. However, a loser was a loser. His ability to absorb nuclei was particularly poor. He had a pile of nuclei but couldn't absorb them. That was why he was only at level 3, and he barely reached it. Even if he was only at level 3, Tang Tianda was still a treasure in the Chinatown survivor base. Xiao Qing bit her nails and suddenly felt that she had picked up something good. She had always wanted to open up a planting area in Jiang City and grow all the things that her friends wanted to eat. However, many of them couldn't be grown because they were almost extinct. Even if they weren't extinct, after mutation, ordinary people couldn't eat them. It didn't matter what she and Dai ate. After all, even if they ate mutated plants, nothing would happen. However, Yang Hanqing and the others were different. She was worried about this matter, and Tang Tianda came to her door. This was like a pie falling from the sky when she was hungry. I can promise you, but I have a condition. Xiao Qing stretched out a finger. After thinking for a long time, she stretched out a second finger. The corner of Tang Tianda's mouth twitched, and then he said, "Say it. If I really save you and your father, I won't ask for anything else. You, come to my base and plant things for me. You have to be at my beck and call," Xiao Qing said with a serious face. After that, she said, "I also want some seeds." Tang Tianda gritted his teeth. "Deal, as long as you can help me, not to mention being at your beck and call, I'll even be your follower." "Okay." Xiao Qing nodded with a smile. She had picked up a follower who could plant anything. Tang Tianda felt a chill run down his spine and couldn't help but shiver. Xiao Qing raised her finger, and a vine that was thinner than her pinky immediately grew out of her fingertip. She handed the vine to Tang Tianda and said, "Take this thing. When you go back, secretly put a part of it on your father, and the other part on yourself. If you are in danger, the vine will instantly form a shield to help you block a fatal blow, and then I will teleport over." This was a new ability she comprehended. It was related to space and was very similar to fixed-point teleportation. The only difference was that the place she wanted to teleport to must be a place she had been to before and left a spatial imprint. She had left a spatial imprint on the vine, so she could teleport over when the time came. Of course, if the distance was too far, she would not be able to do it. For example, from Country M to the Celestial Empire. Otherwise, she could leave her coordinates in Jiang City and go back every night to see her cute baby. "Thank you." Tang Tianda was very grateful. He hurriedly said, "If you need anything in the future, just let me know." Then, he patted his chest loudly. Xiao Qing just smiled and asked, "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Tang Tianda recalled that Xiao Qing wanted to make zhajiang noodles. He salivated. "Yes." Xiao Qing was expressionless. "Can't you tell that I'm just being polite? What I mean is, I'm going to cook. Why are you still here?" Tang Tianda, QAQ then, he left. After he left, Xiao Qing rolled up her sleeves and gave Dai a loving kiss. Then, she said, Dai, sit here obediently and eat the mangosteen. I'm going to cook." Dai sat on the sofa obediently and ate the mangosteen. As he ate, the darkness in his eyes seemed to disperse and became more and more intense. Is it time again? Chapter 538. There was something wrong with his body. At first, he thought that he had returned to normal, but later on, he realized that he hadn't. Every time the sun rose, he would fall into a deep sleep. At this time, he would become that normal Dai. When night fell, he would wake up and become Fu Jingshan. At first, Fu Jingshan believed that Dai was just an abnormal personality. When he returned to normal, Dai would disappear. But later on, he realized that things weren't like that. Dai and him were more like the same soul that had split into two halves. If this continued, wouldn't it be like he had a split personality? Just as Fu Jingshan was holding the mangosteen in a daze, Xiao Qing had finished making the jjiangmian noodles. She brought it out. The snow-white noodles were covered with meat sauce, and it looked especially appetizing. "You're not allowed to eat it. Wait until I'm done with the other dishes," Xiao Qing instructed Fu Jingshan before returning to the kitchen to continue cooking. Fu Jingshan stared blankly at the jjiangmian noodles. After a while, an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. He used to look forward to having a family like this. Someone would wash his hands and make soup for him. He would be tired after a day of hard work outside, and when he returned home, he would be able to eat hot soup and hot dishes. He would sit on the sofa and read the newspaper. She would stick her head out of the kitchen and playfully ask him, "What porridge do you want to eat tonight? Vegetable porridge or century egg and lean meat porridge?" That would be the most perfect life. Then, after he had lost all hope, he would be able to obtain everything he had dreamed of, and even more. He didn't have to rack his brains to think about how to deal with those ill-intentioned relatives, or how to deal with his stepmother and stepbrother who were constantly thinking about killing him. Someone was willing to protect him. He didn't have to do anything or think about anything. Fu Jingshan's heart was in a mess. He unconsciously picked up his chopsticks and started tasting the jajangmyeon noodles. By the time he realized what he was doing, he had already eaten half of the jajangmyeon noodles. Fu Jingshan's face was expressionless, but his heart was filled with curses. Xiaoqing had asked him to wait, but he actually ate it secretly. Fu Jingshan, who had a guilty conscience, secretly piled the sauce on top of the noodles to cover up the traces of the noodles being eaten. In order to make the noodles look as if they had been eaten, he racked his brains and even evenly distributed the noodles that belonged to Xiaoqing in the other bowl. In this way, the two bowls were more or less the same. I was really too witty. Fu Jingshan was secretly proud of himself. After feeling proud of himself, Fu Jingshan wanted to slap himself. Had he been affected by a die? He felt like a real idiot, be it his behavior or his mentality. Fu Jingshan, who felt as if he had been hit hard, stared at the two bowls of noodles in silence until Xiaoqing finished cooking and called him over to help. It was only then that Fu Jingshan crawled out of his stupor and obediently went over to serve the dishes. Although it was only the two of them eating, Xiaoqing still made 4 dishes and 1 soup. It was just that the portions of each dish weren't that big. This way, even if the two of them ate 4 dishes and 1 soup, it wouldn't be a waste. Drink more soup. This soup is very delicious. Xiaoqing sat on the sofa. After picking up her chopsticks, she realized that the portion of the noodles in her bowl was a little wrong. She was stunned for a moment, then smiled, but didn't say anything. Fu Jingshan, on the other hand, felt extremely guilty. While eating, he kept putting food into Xiaoqing's bowl. Xiaoqing was extremely happy. She felt that she had really been hallucinating these 2 days. A die was clearly still so silly. After eating secretly, he didn't even wipe his mouth. Wasn't he just waiting to be caught? Chapter 539. Fu Jingshan's heart was filled with bitterness. He had always thought that he was Dai, the man that Xiaoqing loved. The reason why he didn't tell Xiaoqing that he had regained his memories was because he was inexplicably afraid. However, Xiaoqing told him that he wasn't the man she cared about. He clenched his teeth and said in a flustered tone, "Ah, Qing." As he spoke, his eyes were filled with confusion as though he really didn't know anything. Xiaoqing's eyes were filled with confusion. She tore open Fu Jingshan's clothes and carefully observed him. The familiar scars on his chest, one after another, overturned her guess. Xiaoqing touched the scars with her fingertips. Not only did they look familiar, but they also felt familiar to the touch. Xiaoqing was confused. Was she wrong? Was it because Dumbo could speak and was a little smarter after the breakthrough, so he behaved differently from usual? Then what was with his answer? Xiaoqing didn't know how shocked and disbelieving Fu Jingshan was right now. He couldn't help but reach out and touch his private part. Then, his face was filled with despair. He couldn't get it up. Xiaoqing, who was deep in thought, also noticed his actions. Now, she completely believed that Fu Jingshan was Dai because Dai were zombies. Couldn't get it up. Cough cough. This was normal. She couldn't help but pull open Fu Jingshan's pants to take a look. After confirming, she helplessly let go and hugged Fu Jingshan. "I'm sorry. I keep feeling that you've been a little strange for the past 2 days. You're not like yourself anymore." Fu Jingshan was completely dumbfounded. He didn't even care about the warm and fragrant woman in his arms. He only clutched his belt tightly. He felt that after marrying a wife and regaining his memories, he was about to reach the peak of his life. Then, God played the biggest joke on him. Xiaoqing thought Fu Jingxian was frightened, so she carried him upstairs and said softly, "Baby, I was wrong. Don't be afraid. Let's go to bed." When she crawled into bed, she even gently kissed the corner of Fu Jingxian's eyes. "It'll get better. When you broke through in the past, weren't you able to do that too? That means you're not impotent, but just limited by your body. Maybe you'll be fine after you break through level 9. Fu Jingxian felt comforted and nestled in Xiaoqing's arms. The complicated feelings in his heart were gradually appeased. He could also sense that his current situation was very abnormal. He only had vague fragments of Dai's memories. His memories and Dai's were the same. They were supposed to be one soul, a complete person, but now they had been split into two, each with their own consciousness. That was why half of them would take the initiative during the day and most of them would take the initiative at night. "Let's sleep." After Xiaoqing comforted her husband, she closed her eyes and went to sleep. Fu Jingxian, on the other hand, couldn't fall asleep. He kept his eyes open the entire night, looking at Xiaoqing because he knew that he would fall asleep when the day came. The next day, Xiaoqing had just crawled out of bed and was about to prepare something to eat when someone knocked on the door. Xiaoqing lazily crawled to open the door. When she saw that it was Zhu Morchen, she said, "Didn't you go to see the current ruler of Country M? Why are you back so soon? Things like talking are left to the civil servants. We just have to wait." Zhu Morchen laughed and said, after discussing it, the two sides decided to form a small team to search for the source of the insect plague. "When are we leaving?" Xiaoqing asked in a low voice. "This afternoon," Zhu Morchen said. "We need to meet up with the people on the other side and then discuss other things." "Okay." Xiaoqing nodded. "I'm just about to make dinner. Do you want to eat together?" "Okay." Zhu Morchen immediately entered the room and sat on the sofa to wait. The corner of Xiaoqing's mouth twitched. She said helplessly, "Wait for me for a bit. I'll take care of the dishes first." Zhu Morchen immediately said, "Take your time. I'm not in a hurry." Xiaoqing could only make porridge for 3 people. 1 porridge with lean meat and 1 porridge with spinach. After they finished eating, Xiaoqing sent Zhu Morchen away first. Then, she took Dai to find Tang Tianda and gave him some instructions. She definitely had to join this small team. If something happened to Tang Tianda and his father once she left, distant water definitely wouldn't be able to save a nearby fire. She couldn't teleport over so far. So before she left, she had to tell Tang Tianda not to go out as much as possible and to keep a low profile. The thing she was worried about wouldn't happen so soon. Even if it happened, it was most likely to happen before they left Country M. But it was better to be safe than sorry. If such a good little brother like Tang Tianda died, where would she go to cry? Chapter 540. After instructing her subordinates, Xiaoqing brought the Dai to find Zhu Morchen and meet up with the others. At this time, Xiaoqing discovered that there were a few foreigners with blonde hair and blue eyes in the group. This should be the person sent by the M Nation. Xiaoqing wasn't interested in them. She held a bag of dried strawberries and leaned against the Dai. Occasionally, she would feed the Dai and eat one herself. She looked very relaxed. After everyone was gathered, they prepared to leave. Although Xiaoqing wasn't interested in the foreigners, she was still interested in where they were going. She pricked up her ears and listened. The few of them chatted. This time, they were going to investigate the Zerg's nest. It was the place where the Zerg had first appeared. It was definitely very dangerous to go there. They didn't know when they would die in a certain place. Therefore, several foreigners emphasized, if you are afraid of death, don't go. Don't talk about leaving when you get there. Xiaoqing stuffed a dried strawberry into the Dai's mouth and yawned. By the time they set off, it was already half an hour later. After all, these people were too chatty. The leader was a young foreigner with a scar on his face. It was said that he was the only person who had come out alive after exploring the Zerg's nest. He was the most familiar with the place, so he was the leader this time. There was still a long way to go from here to the Zerg's nest. It would take about 7 to 8 days to walk. These 7 to 8 days were used to hone their teamwork. Xiaoqing didn't think that they would be able to hone their teamwork. After all, the Chinese believed that those who weren't of the same race had different intentions. As for the foreigners, they obviously looked down on them. Both sides had their own thoughts. It would be strange if they could hone their teamwork. Xiaoqing didn't care about these things. She was thinking about her baby and her man. Humans were very strange creatures. Take her for example. She used to be the one who wasn't afraid of death. Every time she was on a mission, she would rush to the front lines. When she accepted a mission, she would also accept the most difficult and dangerous ones. Later on, she had a baby and a lover, so she started to soften and become more apprehensive. This was reflected in the fact that she began to consider more things instead of blindly rushing forward and risking her life. This was probably the legendary maturity. At night, they set up camp. Because they didn't have enough tents, they had to squeeze in 4 or 5 people. Xiaoqing wouldn't squeeze in a tent with others. After setting up the tent, she went in with her dai. Those who were familiar with her didn't dare to say anything. After all, Xiaoqing's status and strength were all there. Everyone knew how cruel she was. However, the group of foreigners didn't know that. One of the blonde girls pointed at Xiaoqing's tent with dissatisfaction and said, "Why can the two of them sleep in the same tent?" Wu Jiaojiao said lazily, "Xiaoqing brought that tent with her. She always brings it with her wherever she goes. Regardless of whether it's accommodation or meals, she's always alone and doesn't count as part of the team." Another foreigner immediately frowned and said, "Oh God, she doesn't have any team spirit. We are a team. How can she count alone?" The civilian staff stayed in the Chinatown survivor base. After all, their abilities were very low. Some of them were even ordinary people who weren't suitable for fighting. Therefore, the people who stayed were all paranormals who were familiar with Xiaoqing's glorious history. Almost all of them had participated in the bloodbath in Jingju. Now, when they looked at Xiaoqing, they were a little scared. Although no one would provoke Xiaoqing. Chapter 541. At the same time, they also wanted to see this group of arrogant foreigners hit Xiaoqing's knife. This territory belonged to the foreigners, so this group of foreigners all had their noses pointed to the sky and were very arrogant. When this small team was first formed, the blonde with big breasts actually ran over to Wu Jiaojiao and asked, "Is it true that people in the Celestial Empire can't afford instant dumplings? Do you really not wash your hands after going to the toilet? You even urinate on the street." At that time, Wu Jiaojiao wanted to throw this woman into a group of wild dogs in heat. What the hell? However, their every move would affect diplomacy. That was why no one stood out to beat up this group of arrogant foreigners. To be honest, in terms of superpowers, they really looked down on this group of foreigners, not to mention Xiaoqing. Wu Jiaojiao prayed in her heart, "Hurry up and go find Xiaoqing. You'd better have a bad attitude." She really wanted to see Xiaoqing slap their faces. Living up to her expectations, this group of people really went to find Xiaoqing. The leader was the blonde woman. She was obviously very arrogant, probably because she had been spoiled. She walked to Xiaoqing's tent and reached out to lift the curtain. As soon as the curtain was lifted, a big flower stretched out. The huge flower was very beautiful, but when it opened its petals, it revealed sharp thorns like sharp teeth. The blonde woman was startled and subconsciously released her superpower. Coincidentally, she was also a wood superpower possessor. What she released was a jade-white flower. This was the strongest plant she had. It was already a level 4 mutated plant. Then, it was swallowed by the big flower. The key point was that after being swallowed by the big flower didn't even burp. It just shook its petals, exhaled a faint fragrance, and finally spat out some residue. If it had a mouth, the big flower would probably directly say, "What the hell is this? It's just trash." The only thing worth mentioning was that its effect was similar to toothpaste. Who would have thought that the thing that was eaten as toothpaste was actually the blonde's strongest move? She was dumbfounded at that time. She opened her mouth and stared at the big flower. She had never seen such an awesome man-eating flower. In her memory, wasn't the man-eating flower a kind of flower that relied on its stench to attract insects and then devoured them? She had also seen some mutated man-eating flowers, but she had never seen such an awesome one. The big flower guarding the door shook its head. Master said that no one was allowed to enter. She was doing something embarrassing inside. If anyone tried to force their way in, it could have a taste first. What arms and legs! He could eat as much as he wanted, as long as he was alive. Hua expressed that it listened to its master the most. If its master told it to eat an arm, it would definitely not eat a leg. If its master told it to eat a bite, it would definitely not eat 2 bites. With that thought in mind, the big flower stuck out its head and sniffed the smell of the blonde man in a very human-like manner. Then, it shook its leaves, indicating that it didn't smell good. A sprinkle of pepper and more salt would probably make it taste much better. Hua was seriously considering whether or not he should ask his master to help him cook it before eating it. It was the first time that he had eaten a foreigner. The blonde man looked at Hua and was a little frightened. After all, Hua was really too ferocious. It was normal that she couldn't handle it. It wasn't until the person beside her reminded her that she remembered what she was here for. Suddenly, she was a little embarrassed and angry, and she shouted, "Miss Xiao, are you inside?" Xiao Qing was kissing Dai. Although because of Dai, they couldn't do many things beyond friendship now, they could still touch and kiss. Chapter 542. After all, she was the only one in this group who didn't work for the government. She could be a little more willful and do whatever she wanted. She didn't need to consider the consequences of her actions at all. To put it bluntly, she had the power to be willful. But even if Wu Jiaojiao and the others didn't have any ill intentions, Xiao Qing didn't like the feeling of being used as a tool. She was actually very petty. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge, but a woman like her would take revenge from morning till night. Thus, when she was cooking, she deliberately let the aroma of the food waft out. She even stood in the direction of the wind so that the aroma could follow the wind and float into everyone's nostrils. Aside from Zhu Morchen, Wu Jiaojiao and the others all had looks of despair on their faces. Offending the great demon king wouldn't end well. Jin Mingyu's nose twitched, and his face was full of desire. "I smell the aroma of chicken stewed with mushrooms. There's also lettuce stir-fried with meat and bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat. Could this smell be braised rabbit head?" Wu Jiaojiao was drooling at his words. "If I could have a bowl of white rice with these dishes." No. 1 bowl of white rice is far from enough. At least 5 bowls. Then, Xiao Qing calmly opened the pot and scooped out the white rice. The rice looked especially beautiful. Every grain of rice was sparkling and translucent. When it was placed in the bowl, it piled up into a small point. When it was time to drizzle some vegetable juice on it and mix it a little, it would be very delicious. Wu Jiaojiao and the others bit their lapels and pulled at their buttons. They wanted nothing more than to cover their noses and eyes. Especially after seeing what Xiao Qing and the others were eating, they could no longer swallow the dry rations in their mouths. This was tasteless wax. The aroma kept drilling into their noses, making it impossible for them to eat the dry rations in their hands. Whether it was their eyes or their noses, they were all attracted to the smell. Wu Jiaojiao tearfully watched as Xiao Qing held a large tray with several dishes and 3 large bowls of rice. As she walked inside, she shouted, "Morchen, it's time to eat. When you come in, don't forget to bring the pot of rice in." Zhu Morchen responded and walked over. Under everyone's envious and jealous gazes, he brought the pot of rice in. Wu Jiaojiao stretched her nose, wishing she could follow the fragrance into the tent. However, the fragrance gradually dissipated, leaving only a faint scent in the air. Wu Jiaojiao regretted it countless times. Why hadn't she been a step ahead of Zhu Morchen and met Xiao Qing? Otherwise, she would be the one eating alone with Xiao Qing. Jin Mingyu pulled out half a bottle of Larogan Ma from his inventory. Then, he dug out some for himself and gave the rest to Wu Jiaojiao. This is all I have in stock. I usually use it to go with my meals when I'm out in the wild. I'll share some with you. Wu Jiao, Kaki don't want Laro godmother. I want Xiaoqing. No, I want Xiaoqing's cooking. A few foreigners slowly came over. One of them whispered to Wu Jiao, the person accompanying you is actually a chef, right? Wu Jiao was speechless. What if Xiaoqing became a chef? She couldn't even compare to a chef. The three of them, who were eating alone, naturally didn't know what the people outside were saying about them. They were discussing business. I feel like these foreigners are unreliable. If we really go deep into the insect nest and encounter any danger, we can just leave and ignore the others, Zhu Morchen said seriously. Let's not think about such depressing things for now. Xiaoqing picked up some food and gave it to him and Dai. The insect nest might not be as scary as you think. Zhu Morchen only smiled. He knew that Xiaoqing was comforting him. That was an insect nest. The entire M country was helpless against the insects that came out of it. When the time comes, I can ask Da Hua to protect you. As Xiaoqing said this, she smiled. She leaned against the table and smiled until her eyes turned into crescents. Dai quietly reached out and rubbed her stomach. Da Hua was probably the nemesis of all insects. This could be seen from its previous behavior. Everything would be fine when the time came. What was there to worry about? Instead of worrying about what would happen in the future, it was better to think about what to eat tomorrow. After the incident with the blonde girl, the foreigners didn't approach Xiaoqing again. This situation continued until they reached their destination. It was a forest near a mountain range. It was said that they had found this place because they were exploring. In the end, they had almost been wiped out. That was why foreigners liked to go on adventures. It was commonly known as playing with one's life. Didn't they see that their entire team had gone into play? In the end, only one person came out alive. The person who came out alive was obviously traumatized by this patch of grass. When he mustered up his courage and walked in, the scars on his face tightened, making him look even more ferocious. First, he swore that he would never step into this place again. But now, he had broken his oath. After a few kilometers, we will be able to see the beehive. This beehive is very big and very dangerous. I hope that no one will act alone, okay? The lucky survivor said solemnly. He really didn't want to step into that nightmarish place, but he had no choice. For his country, for his home, he had to go back. As soon as they entered the forest, they could clearly feel that something was different. The forest was very quiet, and they couldn't even see a single insect. This was abnormal in itself. This forest could be said to be the source of the insect plague. There were no insects at the source of the insect plague. This idea was simply impossible. Xiaoqing thought about it calmly. The bees should be easier to deal with because as long as they killed the queen bee, they could temporarily stop their reproduction. However, the bees would quickly produce another queen bee. Therefore, after killing the queen bee, they had to quickly kill most of the worker bees. The rest would need to be cleaned up bit by bit. The deeper they went, the more cautious they became. Amidst the silence, on the second day, they finally found their first target. The beehive. Chapter 543. Those terrible insects were not only a disaster for humans, but also for other mutated animals and plants. Along the way, the whole forest was dead silent. There were only wreckages on the ground. The shadows of the trees shrouded the white bones. It looked very sad. The silent man with the scar on his face led them to stand in front of the huge hive. His voice was trembling. "It's here." He still remembered that his companion was swallowed and used as a host to lay eggs. He was bitten and eaten alive. He became a deserter and abandoned everyone. In the words of the people of the Celestial Empire, he developed a heart demon because of it. "I'll open the way." Wu Jiao stood up and said lightly. The blonde woman immediately said in a strange tone, "Guests from afar. How can we let guests explore the way? Besides, Things like opening the way should be left to the stronger ones. Otherwise, if everyone is led to a dead end, the whole team will be harmed. The man with the scar on his face had a better vision. He said calmly, "I'll leave it to you, miss." The blonde woman's face immediately turned ugly when her own people didn't give her face. Wu Jiaojiao nodded, and a layer of water shield naturally appeared on her body. That layer of shield was light blue and almost transparent. When it was on a person's body, it looked like a bubble, enveloping Wu Jiaojiao in the middle. Wu Jiaojiao's move had already shut the blonde woman's mouth. At least she still had a vision. She could see that Wu Jiaojiao was very strong. Wu Jiaojiao walked in. It was very dark inside the hive. Her whole body was emitting a faint light because of the shield. The people behind her couldn't see clearly. Jin Mingyu snapped his fingers. A cluster of colorful flames floated above his head like a small light bulb. Shao Qing was more direct. She took out a lantern flower from her space and held it in her hand. The lantern flower emitted a pink light. It looked very beautiful. For a moment, everyone was full of tricks. The whole passage was lit up. Shao Qing was a more attentive person. The first thing she noticed was not the bones on the ground, but the reflection on the walls of the beehive. She stretched out her finger and wiped it. There was a layer of something sticky on her finger. This thing couldn't be eaten casually. She couldn't taste it even if it was in her mouth. Shao Qing sniffed it. There was a hint of fishy sweetness. At this time, she missed Yang Qiue a little. If Yang Qiue was here, she would definitely be able to solve her doubts quickly. After walking for less than 10 minutes, a buzzing sound came from the front. Shao Qing stretched her ears to listen and knew that it was the sound of some kind of insect flapping its wings. And in the beehive, there was no need to say more. Other than bees, there wouldn't be a second type of insect. Those poisonous bees are coming. Shao Qing reminded him. Her 5 senses should be the sharpest among all of them, so she heard it early. It was uncertain whether the others could hear it or not. The blonde woman had no emotional intelligence. Her dislike for Shao Qing's group was written all over her face. When she heard Shao Qing's words, she sneered and said, "Are you the legendary fraud? Why didn't I hear anything?" She didn't believe it. Wu Jiaojiao, who knew Shao Qing's strength, believed it. Wu Jiaojiao was ready. She raised her hand and a small and exquisite water ball appeared in her palm. Her control of water power could be said to be one of the best in the whole country. At least, there was no second water power user who could compete with her. Chapter 544. A minute of silence passed. Just as the blonde was about to say something sarcastic, a swarm of poisonous bees buzzed over. The smallest of the poisonous bees was the size of a fist. They flapped their wings and flew over from the end of the tunnel. Everyone's expression changed. The one with the worst expression was the man with the scar on his face from the previous batch of survivors. The man subconsciously took a step back, then gritted his teeth and didn't retreat again. Wu Jiaojiao raised her hand and the water ball flew out. The water ball was like a bouncy ball. After touching the first poisonous bee, it bounced around the whole swarm. Her skill didn't hurt any of the poisonous bees at all, but it made all the poisonous bees wet. Then, she waved her hand and a cold current rushed over. All the poisonous bees that were touched by the water ball immediately became small ice sculptures and fell to the ground. The ice element was a variant of the water element. Logically speaking, Wu Jiaojiao should be an ordinary water element paranormal, but she had learned the ice element by herself. No wonder she was the boss of thorns and roses. No wonder she was the idol of all the water element paranormal. After the poisonous bees were frozen, they lost their ability to fight and were easily dealt with. Under the gazes of the foreigners, Wu Jiaojiao raised her head proudly and led her companions forward. Shao Qing would warn Wu Jiaojiao in advance every time they were about to encounter poisonous bees. Then, Wu Jiaojiao would make a stunning move. In the eyes of foreigners, poisonous bees were the Grim Reaper, but in Wu Jiaojiao's hands, they were easily dealt with. It's too frequent. Shao Qing estimated that this swarm of poisonous bees came and went very frequently. According to the season, it seemed to be the season for bees to lay eggs. In other words, it was the season when the queen bee needed food the most. No wonder this swarm of poisonous bees arrogantly went out to hunt humans. Because their queen bee needed a lot of nutrients and food to maintain the energy for laying eggs and hatching. When the queen bee laid eggs, it should be the most dangerous time for the whole swarm. They had made it in time. The center of the hive is just ahead. Everyone be careful, Xiao Qing said lightly. The man with the scar on his face also said, the queen bee should be in the nest. Can we really kill it? Wu Jiaojiao said, what are we here for? Now is not the time to be overly cautious. Let's go. Then, she took the lead and walked in. In the center of the beehive was a huge hall. On the four walls of the hall, there were small openings, and in each of the openings were poisonous bees. Poisonous bees kept flying out of the beehive. The huge queen bee dragged its big belly and laid on the ground. Its belly was so big that it couldn't move because it was time for it to lay eggs. The last time they came, they only woke up the sleeping queen bee, so that queen bee was more agile. At this time, the queen bee relied on the worker bees to eat. Its huge stomach wriggled, producing pure white eggs one after another. Then, worker bees would fly over and carry the eggs away. These eggs had two hatching methods. The first was that the queen bee directly laid the eggs in the body of a certain creature. This way, they would hatch quickly. After hatching, the young bees would eat the host and grow faster. The second method was the small openings in the wall. The worker bees would put the eggs in those small openings and seal the openings. After a period of time, the young bees would break out of the holes. Chapter 545. That's the queen bee. Wu Jiaojiao looked at the huge queen bee in a daze. After a while, she swallowed her saliva and said, it's really big. Someone will lead the team to clean up the worker bees, and someone will lead the team to surround the queen bee. This is the most suitable division of labor. Then, the question is, who will be responsible for cleaning up the worker bees, and who will be responsible for surrounding the queen bee? Xiao Qing glanced around. No one spoke. Some people saw the current situation more clearly, such as Wu Jiaojiao. Wu Jiaojiao was very clear that the most suitable person was Xiao Qing to lead them to kill the queen bee and leave the worker bees to the foreigners. But the problem was that some people always felt that they were the best, such as the blonde. So, a disagreement arose. However, they had already alarmed the worker bees. If they delayed like this, they couldn't discuss anything and couldn't do anything. Do you think the queen bee is so easy to kill? Since you want to kill the queen bee, you can go ahead. We will be responsible for cleaning up the worker bees. Wu Jiaojiao raised her eyelids and said. Killing the queen bee was the most dangerous task. They weren't willing to do it. It wasn't their own business. If they helped, they would have to look at other people's faces. Since this group of foreigners insisted on doing this job, they would let them do it. It was a life-risking job. Why did they think they were snatching it? Some of the foreigners' faces were a little green. They were willing to kill the worker bees. The queen bee was not easy to deal with. At least they had experience with worker bees. It would be easier to deal with them. But since the blonde had already spoken, they couldn't refute their own people. Moreover, if they refuted at this time, it would definitely make them look particularly cowardly. They could only bite the bullet and agree. At this time, the worker bees were already alarmed. With the queen bee's sharp cry, they all moved out and flew towards Xiao Qing and the others. I'll leave the queen bee to you. Everyone else, come to my side. Xiao Qing waved her hand, and Wu Jiaojiao and the others gathered. After everyone gathered, Xiao Qing raised her hand, and Guangguang appeared on the ground. The allies who were enveloped by Guangguang immediately felt that their bodies were full of energy. At the same time, Little Red also climbed onto Guangguang. It only came out to get some fresh air. The other one that came out to get some fresh air was probably Big Flower. When Big Flower was released, it was so excited that it spun around twice and stared at the worker bees while drooling. After it became a part of Xiao Qing, it was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much it ate, it would never be full. The more it was hungry, the more it liked to eat, just like now. It looked at the worker bees flying in the sky, and its saliva was like an open faucet, overflowing with corrosive liquid. "You can eat to your heart's content today," Xiaoqing kindly said to Diehua. Big Flower was so excited that it kept shaking its leaves. It even ordered its little brother, Little Red, to get some for it to eat. The foreigners had already braced themselves to deal with the queen bee. They sat under the tree and took turns to deal with the worker bees. They couldn't be blamed for being idle, but Big Flower was too awesome. Big Flower stood on the ground, opened its petals, and began to emit a strange fragrance. Its little brother, Little Red, also stretched out its own flower and released the fragrance. Little Red's flower fragrance had the ability to cause hallucinations, and Big Flower's flower fragrance had the ability to seduce. The worker bees, who were originally very aggressive because the queen bee laid eggs, began to drill into Big Flower's mouth after smelling the fragrance. Big Flower simply didn't need to use any effort. It opened its petals, and food fell into its mouth. Wu Jiaojiao and the others were completely idle because they were not needed at all. Xiaoqing alone was enough. All the worker bees were attracted to them. The other side was more pitiful. They had just reached the queen bee's side when they were attacked. The queen bee was guarded by a group of high-level worker bees. Those poor guys were chased by the worker bees, and they all felt bitter in their hearts. They were all facing the worker bees, but why was the gap between them so big? Wu Jiaojiao killed the worker bees as if it was a game, and the worker bees chased them as if it was a game. Xiaoqing killed the worker bees while sitting, and the queen bee killed them while lying on the ground. However, they asked for it, and they couldn't blame others. No matter how bitter their hearts were, they could only cry and rush up. It was not easy for them to touch the queen bee, but they were dumbfounded again. Although the queen bee's belly was white and tender, its defense was very high. Their attacks fell on the queen bee's belly as if it was a game. They couldn't even see a white mark, let alone a wound. The queen bee immediately went crazy because of the pain. It shook its belly and rolled on the ground, almost crushing a paranormal who was standing close to it. The foreigners were speechless. They were not afraid of godlike opponents, but they were afraid of pig-like teammates. Chapter 546. One side was sitting on the ground drinking tea, while the other side was being chased by the bee queen. The difference was huge, and the foreigners could not take it anymore. One of them was slammed to the wall by the bee queen. He lay on the ground and shouted, friends from China, please help me. Now you know how to call for friends." Wu Jiaojiao sneered and said, "What were you doing earlier?" The others ran until they were out of breath. They also began to shout, saying all sorts of words to admit defeat. In the end, even the blonde woman apologized. Although face was important, what was more important was his life. "I'll leave these worker bees to you." Xiaoqing left Guangguang and walked over with Diehua. Dai followed her. As soon as she took over, the foreigners ran over. Xiaoqing moved her wrists and said to Dai, "Use the worker bees around to block them for me." Dumbo nodded, indicating that he wouldn't let even one go. Xiaoqing smiled and handed Diehua to Dai. She jumped up and landed on the bee queen's back. The bee queen could feel that someone was on its back, so it started twisting crazily, trying to get rid of Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing calmly raised her hand. Countless vines drilled out from the ground and wrapped the bee queen like a cocoon. Only its head and tail were exposed. The bee queen had never been treated like this before. It was a level 6 mutant bee, but its greatest strength was in reproduction and defense. Its attack power was actually not very strong. It was scary because there were too many poisonous bees guarding it. However, because it needed a lot of energy to lay eggs, 99% of the worker bees in the hive went out to look for food. Therefore, it was an empty nest queen bee. No matter how powerful the general was, it was useless without soldiers. It could only be said that Xiaoqing and the others were too lucky. The bee queen's defense was very strong, but would it be useful against Xiaoqing? Xiaoqing easily tore open its belly. The white and round egg was exposed. The bee queen screamed in pain, and a special wave spread out. The small hole in the wall was covered with a thin layer of membrane, but it was suddenly pierced by black claws. Countless poisonous bees that were smaller than normal workers crawled out. They were all poisonous bees that had been catalyzed by the bee queen in advance. Xiaoqing easily grabbed the queen bee's head. Using her 5 fingers as a knife, she cut into the queen bee's head like cutting tofu. After groping around for a long time, she pulled out a crystal core. The crystal core was pink and shiny. The color was very beautiful. The queen bee that had lost its crystal core was naturally dead. The foreigners were dumbfounded. They had been chased all over the place and had almost lost their lives. In the end, Xiaoqing had taken care of it in a minute. The gap between them was simply too big. After putting away the crystal core, Xiaoqing did not stop. She took out the big white egg from the bee queen's body. It was a good thing and had high nutritional value. It could be brought back as a special product and let the few people at home taste it. After taking the eggs, Xiaoqing went on a killing spree. This was the first time those people had seen Xiaoqing killing spree. She, Dai, and Da Hua were like a meat grinder. The poisonous bees came but did not return. Soon, they were all killed. Xiaoqing clapped her hands and put Da Hua away. She was not ready to leave. There must be a lot of good things in the hive. Naturally, she had to tidy it up before leaving. Chapter 547. After witnessing Xiaoqing's strength, the foreigners all fell silent. With Xiaoqing's strength, she could wipe out all of them by herself. They had nothing to say. Xiaoqing didn't care about them at all. She was sweeping the area with Dai and Da Hua. There were many unhatched eggs in the small holes in the surrounding walls. There was also a blood pool where the queen bee was lying. It was full of honey. Xiaoqing said that all of this was hers. Who dared to snatch it? Did anyone dare to? She filled all the oil barrels in her space with honey. In the end, her small space couldn't hold it anymore. She waved her hand generously. The rest is yours. Everyone, one of the foreigners still had a look of disbelief. Such a terrifying insect plague ended just like that. Xiaoqing shook her head. No. Although we killed the queen bee, another queen bee will be born after losing the queen bee. However, it takes time for the queen bee to grow. In the short term, there won't be any more poisonous bees to harass you. Those people looked at each other. Their eyes were saying, "Oh my God, is there no way to solve it once? We can burn this hive," someone suggested. Then the remaining worker bees will go crazy. They will attack humans crazily without caring about their own lives. It will be another disaster then, Xiaoqing said expressionlessly. Everyone was silent for a while. They knew that Xiaoqing was right. They packed up and prepared to leave. They still had one more place to go. That was the place where the black beetles came from. As for the marching ants, they wouldn't stay in one place for too long. They were just passing by and accidentally participated in the insect plague. The black beetles were the most important thing in this operation. After leaving the honeycomb, the way everyone looked at Xiaoqing was no longer the same as before. The strong naturally had the treatment of the strong. No one would ask Xiaoqing why she had occupied a tent all by herself, and no one would question Xiaoqing for dragging the team down. What a joke. In fact, they were the ones who were dragging him down. After leaving the beehive, they did not rashly search for the next location. Instead, they found a safe place to set up camp and prepared to rest for a while before continuing on their journey. Xiaoqing had always believed that only good food and the babies at home could not be let down. Therefore, as soon as they set up camp, she could not wait to prepare the bee pupae she had obtained. Bee pupae could be made very easily. All he had to do was fry them in hot oil and add a little salt. The taste would be extraordinarily good. She ate one and found that the pupae contained a lot of energy, which was very helpful for her cultivation. Xiaoqing gave some to Qin Zishi and Zhu Morchen. After the group finished eating, they returned to their tents to rest. Xiaoqing rubbed his belly, feeling very satisfied. The apocalypse also had its benefits. The food was more delicious than before the apocalypse. For a foodie, this kind of life was still very happy. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he could hug his die and sleep. What else did he need? The next day, they continued on their journey. Someone had investigated the source of the black beetles. It was at the bottom of a cliff at the end of the forest. When they reached the cliff, they borrowed Xiaoqing's vine rope to descend the cliff. The cliff was very deep, and they could not see the bottom when they stood at the top. After descending, they found that it was even deeper than they had imagined. They were like grasshoppers lined up on a rope, climbing back and forth until their feet touched the ground. The ground beneath their feet was covered with a thick layer of dead leaves, and there was a rotten smell. After all of them reached the bottom of the cliff, they began to walk forward. Wu Jiaojiao took the lead, but after taking a few steps, her expression changed. She hurriedly pressed her palms down, freezing the ground beneath her feet. At this time, she said with lingering fear, "Under the pile of leaves, it's soft. It might be a swamp. Everyone, be careful." She used her special ability to create an ice path and led everyone forward. As they walked, Xiaoqing suddenly heard a faint gurgling sound coming from under their feet. It was really a very faint sound, like water boiling. She listened carefully, and then her expression changed. "Hurry up." Although everyone did not know what was going on, they all listened to her and ran forward quickly. The last person had just run a distance when they discovered that something had drilled out of the ground and directly drilled through the ice. It was a huge purplish-black vine. There were bubble-like spots on the surface of the vine. It looked very disgusting. The vine was as thick as a person, and as it swung, it broke the ice. The group of people hurriedly ran forward. As they ran, it was as if they had awakened the sleeping vines in the ground. Vines constantly drilled out of the ground. Not only did the vines look scary, but some of the vines, in the process of breaking the ice, were squeezed out of the bubbles, and immediately, black pus dripped out. When the pus dripped on the ground, whether it was the dead leaves or the ice, it would quickly corrode. If this pus fell on a person's body, it would probably directly corrode the person to the point that not even their bones would be left. Everyone shuddered and ran forward with their heads down. Fortunately, this kind of vine would not chase after people. Even if it danced wildly, it would only stay in place. So as long as they ran a little faster, there was no danger. Wu Jiaojiao ran at the front. There should be a swamp under her feet. She had to use the fastest speed to freeze a path. Otherwise, there would only be two results. Either they would fall into the swamp and die, or they would be hit by the vines and die. Either way, they would die. Under the pressure of the crisis, it was as if she had turned on a cheat. She continuously waved her hand and waved it again. A long ice path appeared under their feet. In order to conserve her ability, the ice path was very narrow and could only accommodate 2 feet. However, no one cared about this. They were all focused on running for their lives. If they ran too slowly, they might lose their lives. "I see land." Wu Jiaojiao, who was at the front, suddenly cried out in surprise. The yellow land was not far away. As long as they stepped on it, they would probably be able to escape from these terrifying vines. However, the surprise only lasted for a moment. Because in the next second, a huge vine suddenly appeared in front of them. The vine appeared in front of Wu Jiaojiao. If Zhu Morchen had not reacted quickly and grabbed Wu Jiaojiao would probably have run headfirst into it. The consequences of running into it were self-evident. Pincer attack. Everyone was expressionless. This time, it seemed like they were really done for. Chapter 548. Thank you. Wu Jiaojiao gulped, her face pale. She had been so excited that she had let her guard down and had almost lost her life. "No need to thank me. Let's think about how we're going to get through first," Zhu Morchen said expressionlessly. "I'll stop it. You guys hurry up." Xiaoqing raised her hand, and thin vines shot out, wrapping around the purplish-black vines. The purplish-black vines struggled with great force, causing Xiaoqing to stumble. Then, Dai pulled her back. Dai reached out and grabbed the vines. Together with Xiaoqing, they restrained the purplish-black vines. Everyone else took the opportunity to run forward. The purplish-black vines seemed to know that they were going to run, and they wriggled furiously. Finally, with a crack, they broke Xiaoqing's vines. At this moment, most of the people had already run past. Qin Zishi was at the very back. Xiaoqing leapt forward, and countless vines formed a cage around Qin Zishi, trapping her within. Then, the purplish-black vines slammed into the cage, causing it to almost fall apart. Bubbles popped, and liquid flowed out, corroding the cage until it was on the verge of collapse. Xiaoqing didn't care about the purplish-black vines. The two vines were like hammers that struck the cage, and then directly pushed the cage to the safe ground. Once Qin Zishi was safe, Xiaoqing let out a sigh of relief. She glanced at Dai, and Dai immediately understood and leapt forward. At the same time, Xiaoqing's vines reached Dai's feet. Dai stepped on the vines, and his body rose once again. The purplish-black vines whipped at him, and Dai leapt into the air like a pigeon, landing easily on the ground. When Xiaoqing passed, it was probably the easiest. She disappeared on the spot, and when she reappeared, she was already beside Dai. Everyone looked at her with a hint of fear in their eyes. After all, an unknown power was even more frightening than a known power. Let's go. Xiaoqing pulled Dai. I'll lead the way this time. Wu Jiaojiao didn't say anything because she was very clear that Xiaoqing's perception and other aspects were much stronger than hers. Moreover, her strength was also very strong. If there was any sudden accident, Xiaoqing would be able to react faster and better than her. Therefore, Xiaoqing walked at the front. Xiaoqing and Dai walked side by side at the front. The cliffs on both sides were very steep and looked a little scary. It was as if they were trapped in a narrow gorge, and it was terrifyingly silent. Even the crunching sound of the dead leaves under their feet could be heard clearly. Everyone, hold your breath. Xiaoqing said in a low voice. There are a lot of poisonous fungi growing on the ground and the cliffs here. They will emit a very toxic smell, which is very harmful to the human body. Since Xiaoqing said that, they naturally believed her. Therefore, they all held their breath, afraid that they would really be poisoned. After hearing Xiaoqing's warning, they began to observe the surrounding environment. Then, they found that there was indeed a kind of fungus growing on the ground and the cliffs. Its color was very similar to that of the rocks. Because its color was so similar to the rocks, there was no way to find it if they didn't look carefully. This kind of fungus looked like a layer of fleshy membrane. It was round and attached to the ground and walls. There were many small spots on its surface, and it emitted a faint smell. This smell was mixed with the smell of decay, so it was very difficult to find it. Thus, after exclaiming in admiration, they felt even more admiration for Xiaoqing. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.